Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. I didn't think much of it at first, just a gig to keep me afloat until I figured things out. After everything that happened with my last job, I needed something quiet, something simple. So when I found the listing for a night security position at a defunct water park 30 minutes outside the city, it almost felt like a blessing. The pay wasn't great, but they offered housing on site in a tiny trailer behind the maintenance building, and I wouldn't have to interact with anyone. Perfect, I thought. The ad was vague, just that they needed someone reliable to make rounds between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. No guests, no staff. Just me and an old park that hadn't seen a summer since before the pandemic. The place was called Crystal Lagoon Water Resort, and I vaguely remembered it from childhood. Cheesy radio ads, bright blue slides that curled around each other like intestines, a giant fiberglass octopus near the kiddie pool. I remembered it closed down after a kid drowned in the wave pool. I never followed the story closely, and by the time I was old enough to care, the place had already been gutted of fun. But as I drove out for my first shift, winding through dark forest roads toward the rusted gates, that long-forgotten death clawed its way back into my mind. It was just supposed to be an easy job, but I knew something was off the moment I stepped out of my car that first night. The air felt heavier than it should have, wet and sour like the smell of algae and blood baking under sun-bleached concrete. The entire park was dead silent, but I swear I could hear the faint squeak of water shoes on tile echoing somewhere in the distance, even though everything had been dry for years. The trailer they gave me wasn't much, just a bed, a kitchenette, and a tiny radio that only played static. A binder full of instructions sat on the table. Turn on perimeter lights at 10 p.m., walk the main paths hourly, make sure gates to the slides are chained and padlocked. They weren't trying to stop people from getting in. That was the first thing I noticed. There was no mention of vagrants, no talk of teenagers sneaking in to party. Every line in that binder felt like it was written to keep something from getting out. I laughed to myself. I thought maybe they were trying to spook me, like some kind of initiation prank. Still, I followed the rules. The first few nights were uneventful, and I started to settle into the routine. I'd walk the main drag past the food court, the wave pool, the locker rooms. I always saved the slides for last. Something about them made me uncomfortable, especially the big ones, the Black Serpent and Neptune's Drop. They were both over 4 stories high, spiraling towers of black and seafoam green plastic that loomed over the rest of the park like watchtowers. I'd shine my flashlight up the staircases and double-check the padlocks on the gates, but I never climbed them. Not at night, not alone. On my 4th night, I found the padlock on Neptune's Drop undone. It was just hanging there, the gate wide open like it was waiting for someone to climb up. I froze. No one else had access to the park. There were cameras near the entrance, and I checked them before starting my rounds. No motion alerts, no signs of intrusion. I relocked the gate, climbed halfway up the stairs to check for damage, and then turned back. I radioed it in, but no one responded. The walkie they gave me was old, full of static, and I didn't even know who I was supposed to call. There was no supervisor on site, no security team, just me. I wrote it off as a fluke, but over the next few nights, it kept happening. One slide or another would be open when I got there. Lock unlatched, sometimes missing entirely. I started carrying spares with me and kept a notebook of when and where it happened. Then came the sounds. It started as splashing. At first, I thought it was wind knocking loose debris down the flumes, but it didn't sound random. It sounded rhythmic, like someone was going down the slides in intervals, one after another. I'd shine my flashlight up into the tubes and see nothing. The stairs would be empty, no footprints, no drips, but the sound would always stop the moment I got close, like whatever it was knew I was listening. One night I heard giggling, childlike and high-pitched. It echoed off the concrete and warped with distance, so I could never pinpoint where it came from. I remember standing dead still near the lazy river, trying not to breathe, trying not to blink. And then a splash, one sharp, echoing splash from the kiddie pool behind me. I turned slowly, heart pounding, light trembling in my hand. The pool was dry, cracked and full of leaves. Nothing could splash in it. Nothing should have. But I saw the ripples. I saw the water move even though there wasn't any water left. I backed away, too afraid to run, too curious to leave. That night, I locked myself in the trailer, pushed the mini fridge against the door, and didn't sleep. I told myself it was stress. I'd been burning out for months. My last job ended badly. My family didn't talk to me anymore. I was drinking too much. I wanted this to be normal. But Crystal Lagoon wasn't normal. I started researching the park's history during the day when the sun made everything feel less cursed. The drowning was just the tip of it. There were at least 5 recorded deaths on the property during its final year. A maintenance worker crushed under a water tank, a lifeguard who disappeared during her shift, a kid who broke his neck on the speed slide. The police reports were vague and short, as if someone didn't want the stories getting out. And after the wave pool incident, the owners filed for bankruptcy and shuttered the whole place in under a week. No auctions, no salvage, just closed and left to rot. The thing that got to me was an old forum post I found, buried in an archived fan page for defunct amusement parks. Someone had written a long, rambling rant about Crystal Lagoon from 10 years ago. He said there was a thing in the slides, a shape, something that didn't belong to water or man. He called it the slick. He said it moved like a child but didn't sound like one. Said it watched from inside the tunnels and whispered in voices that weren't its own. I tried to brush it off as an urban legend. Every park has one. But I couldn't stop thinking about the locks, the splashes, the giggling. And then one night, something crawled out of Neptune's drop. It happened just after 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, the kind of night where the clouds hang so low it feels like the sky is pressing down on you. I'd done my usual loop, rechecked the gates, found 2 more locks missing, one from the Black Serpent, the other from a secondary slide called the Coral Coil. I was starting to grow numb to the fear, or maybe just exhausted from constantly carrying it. I was standing on the observation deck near the deep end of the drained wave pool, flipping through my logbook under the weak beam of my flashlight, when I heard it, a sharp clang of metal on plastic, followed by the wet, slapping sound of something heavy dropping into a dry basin. My blood turned cold. The noise had come from Neptune's drop. I didn't want to go. Every fiber in my body told me to run back to the trailer, shut the door, and wait for sunrise. But something had changed inside me. Maybe it was the long nights of isolation. Maybe it was some sick curiosity, but I needed to see what had made that noise. I walked fast, almost jogging, cutting through the abandoned food court with its overturned picnic tables and faded Pepsi banners that still fluttered like flags in a ghost town. The slide tower rose before me like a giant fossil, bleached and cracked, its once bright seafoam panels dulled to the color of rot. The gate was wide open again, hinges creaking slightly in the wind. This time the padlock was there, bent completely out of shape, twisted like soft clay. No bolt cutters could have done that without making a racket. I stepped through the gate, every step up the staircase a little harder than the last, each creak of the rusted metal threatening to collapse beneath me. My flashlight flickered. I smacked it with my palm and it steadied, the beam stretching up the tight spiral of stairs until it landed on something at the top of the platform. At first, I thought it was a bundle of wet towels, like someone had dumped a lost and found pile from the 90s and left it to mold. But then it moved, slowly, deliberately. It was hunched over on all fours, its limbs too long, bending at wrong angles like puppet strings had yanked its joints loose. Its skin, or what passed for skin, looked like it was made of waterlogged latex, sickly pale and semi-translucent. I could see a hint of dark shapes swimming just under the surface, like leeches beneath a stretched drum of flesh. It turned toward me, but there were no eyes, just 2 sunken hollows above what might have been a mouth, except the lips were wrong, stitched in multiple directions, pulled tight like wet rope laced through a zipper. I didn't move. Neither did it. We just stood there for what felt like hours. The thing breathing, not with lungs, but with a slow, expanding twitch that made its whole body balloon and contract like a jellyfish pulsing in still water. Then it scurried forward, not ran, scurried. Like a crab without a shell, it dropped down the mouth of Neptune's drop and vanished into the tunnel with a wet, sickening slurp. I heard it moving through the slide, Fast, impossibly fast, scraping and whipping through the pipe. Then a splash. A real, genuine splash at the bottom. I ran. I didn't check the landing pool. I didn't look to see if anything was there. I bolted back to the trailer, locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and shoved my desk against the window. I stayed awake until the sun came up, the walls of the trailer seeming thinner every hour. The park was quiet again by morning, too quiet, and I almost convinced myself I imagined the whole thing. But when I stepped outside, something was wrong with the grass near the slide's exit pool. It was wet, not damp, wet, like the sprinklers had been on all night. But there were no sprinklers near Neptune's drop, and the rest of the park was bone dry. Worse still, the air had that smell again, that thick, coppery humidity like blood left to stew in stagnant water. I didn't tell anyone. There wasn't anyone to tell. The number I was given for emergencies went straight to voicemail. The office back in town didn't even open until 10. I debated quitting. I had packed most of my things by that afternoon, ready to throw it all into the trunk and ghost the job entirely. But then I opened the trailer door and found something waiting for me on the steps. A pair of water shoes, children's size, soaking wet, covered in algae. I hadn't seen them there before, and they hadn't been on the property inventory list in the binder. I checked the cameras again, every last one of them. Static. Nothing but static for the past 6 hours. Someone had wiped the feeds, or something had. I didn't leave. I don't know why. I just couldn't. It was like the park didn't want me to go. That night, I stayed inside the trailer the entire shift, but it didn't matter. Around 2:13 a.m., something started thumping against the door. Softly at first, like a kid knocking with the back of their hand. Then harder. Thump, thump, thump. No voice, no footsteps, just wet, smacking force on the metal door. I didn't make a sound. I turned off the lights. I held my breath and prayed that whatever was outside wouldn't break in. Then I heard it, laughing. That same childlike giggle warped by distance and pitch shifted into something animal. It didn't come from the door, came from above me. From the roof of the trailer, I heard scraping, nails on metal, a dragging sound like fingers, too many fingers, sliding along the aluminum siding. Then, nothing. Silence so pure it made my ears ring. I didn't sleep again. I started marking down every event in the logbook, not the park's log, my own. Something was using the slides again. Something never stopped using them. I started seeing water where there shouldn't be water. Puddles forming under dry pipes. Wet footprints leading into dry pools. And the water was wrong. It smelled like rot. It shimmered, but not from light. More like it moved, even when it was still. I tested it once, just out of morbid curiosity. I dipped the end of my flashlight into a puddle near the Black Serpent's stairs. When I pulled it out, the metal was gone. Eaten away like acid had melted the tip into a soft curve. I never touched it again. That night, I set up a camera near the bottom of Neptune's drop. Not one of the old security cams, I knew better by now, but my personal DSLR on a tripod, wired to a battery pack and set to record for 8 hours straight. I reviewed the footage the next day and almost threw up. For the first hour, nothing happened, just darkness and wind. Then, around 1:44 a.m., the puddle at the bottom began to ripple. No sound, no visible entry point. It just started bubbling like something was breathing just beneath it. And then something rose from the pool. Not climbed out, but emerged, like the water was a membrane it passed through. It was the same creature from the stairs, but now it was taller, stretched unnaturally, with limbs that dragged on the concrete. It walked on all fours but moved like it wanted to stand, like it was pretending not to. And behind it, the slide flexed, bent, like something else was still inside it, pushing through the plastic, stretching it from within. The creature stood at the base of the slide for nearly 6 minutes, staring straight at the camera with its hollow sockets, before turning and crawling back up the stairs in total silence. Against gravity, against everything I know about the world, it disappeared back into the darkness of the tower and the tape cut out seconds later. I didn't press stop. The battery didn't die. The file just ended. I played it back 10 times, praying I had hallucinated it, but it was real. I had proof. Proof I should have taken to the police, to the media, to anyone. But I didn't, because something else happened the next day. The footage was gone. Not deleted, corrupted. The file name was there, the timestamp, the exact length. But when I opened it, all I saw was a frame of static, and in the corner, something new. A child's hand pressed against the lens. I hadn't seen that the night before. It wasn't in the footage I watched. It was like the creature knew I watched it and added its own message after the fact. And that was the night the slides started calling my name. I've never believed in voices coming from nowhere. Disembodied whispers, hallucinations, or the classic horror trope where someone hears their name in the dark. That sort of thing always seemed cheap to me, like a gimmick meant to sell a story. But the first time I heard it at Crystal Lagoon, it didn't sound like a ghost or a trick of the wind. It sounded like me. Not just someone calling my name, but someone using my exact voice. Same tone, same cadence, as if it had been recorded in my throat and then echoed back through miles of twisting plastic tunnels. I was standing by the coral coil again, notebook in hand, taking down the time and condition of the padlocks, when I heard a whisper drift through the slide's open mouth. It came out soft and hollow like breath through a straw, but it was unmistakable. My voice sang my own name, just once, just a gentle, almost affectionate murmur. Hey! Hey, my name! My stomach twisted. My legs froze. I crouched beside the slide's entry pipe and listened, too scared to breathe, too stupid to leave. Nothing for a while, just silence and the brittle clicking of leaves overhead. Then the voice again, but different this time, like a looped recording of something I hadn't said yet. It said, "Don't worry, you're not alone." I ran. I sprinted back across the park, stumbling over broken tiles and rusted bolts, nearly losing my footing in the lazy river's empty channel. The sound chased me, not in volume, but in weight, like something heavy and invisible had sunk into the air around me and pressed in from every side, whispering from shadows and dry pipes, crawling over my eardrums like mold. I locked myself in the trailer again, curtains drawn, lights off, and tried to turn the radio on just for some human noise. But it didn't play music. It didn't play static. It played me, my voice, a conversation I never had, responding to someone I couldn't hear. It would start mid-sentence, "Don't know if I can take another night here," and then a long pause, then another line, "No, I haven't seen the other guard. I think he's gone too." But I'd never said those things. Not out loud. Not into any device. The radio knew something I didn't. That was the night I began wondering if there was another guard before me. One who vanished without a trace. I scoured the trailer the next morning, desperate to find a clue. Something overlooked in a drawer or behind a panel. And I found it, wedged beneath a warped floorboard under the desk. A plastic access card. No name, just the words Night Staff, 01, and a long-faded logo for Crystal Lagoon. I checked the binder again. My badge said Night Staff, 02. There had been someone before me, someone who'd been erased. That day, I made the first of many terrible decisions. I decided to climb one of the slides. Not just check the padlock or shine my light up the stairs. I mean actually ascend to the launch platform and crawl into the slide tunnel itself. I chose the coral coil because it was the shortest. Just a dozen steps up to the tower, then a tight spiral tube that bent back and forth like a coiled intestine before dumping out into a shallow collection basin. I figured I could make it in and out in less than a minute. I brought my flashlight, a walkie, and a GoPro clipped to my chest because part of me still wanted this to be explainable and part of me needed a witness. I climbed into the tube. The interior was dry but slick, as if condensation had recently receded. The air smelled like mildew and bleach and something sour, something organic. I crawled forward slowly, letting my hands and knees guide me, feeling every ribbed section of plastic hum faintly with pressure from the sun. Halfway through the tunnel, I heard it, a squishing sound behind me. I turned, nothing. I aimed the flashlight into the curved bend behind me and saw only black plastic. I pressed forward, heart hammering against the ribs of the slide itself. Then I heard breathing. Not behind me, ahead of me. I froze. There was no room in this tunnel for anything else. No exits, no branches, no compartments. Just me and plastic and the echo of something rasping breath from just beyond the next curve. I inched forward, every movement screaming at my muscles to reverse. But the breathing stopped, replaced by a dragging sound. It was faint at first, like nails raking over a wet sheet. Then it got louder, closer, and I saw it, just a flash, a glimpse. Something wet and jointless sliding around the bend toward me like a string of meat pulled along a conveyor belt. Its face, or the part it showed me, was smooth and rippling, like water tension over cartilage. It had no eyes, just a ring of teeth at the end of what looked like a stretched, puckered snout. I screamed, kicked backward, and slid hard out the end of the coral coil, landing in the dry basin with a crack that nearly knocked the wind from me. I scrambled to my feet, looked back up the slide's exit, but nothing followed. Nothing peaked, just silence and sunlight. I reviewed the GoPro footage that night in the trailer. The camera captured everything up to the moment I turned around. Then the lens glitched just for a second, and for 4 frames I saw it. Frame by frame, a blurry, veiny appendage entered the edge of the camera's view. It had skin like chewed bubblegum and too many joints. For frames, then static. I checked the timestamp. Those 4 frames had replaced 38 seconds of footage. Whatever was in there with me, the camera refused to record it fully. As if the digital I had blinked when the real terror crawled in. That night, the whispering came again. From every direction. From inside my trailer's sink drain. From under the fridge. From the vent over my head. "Don't leave me," it said. "Don't leave me alone again." I didn't sleep. I started smoking again, which I hadn't done since college. Couldn't eat. Couldn't dream. I felt like the water park was wearing me down, not just mentally but physically. Like the longer I stayed, the more I sank into it. That next evening, just before sundown, I saw something that shattered whatever was left of my rational mind. I was on the observation deck again, drinking cold coffee from a thermos and trying to psych myself up for another round of terror, when I noticed movement in the drained wave pool. At first I thought it was a trick of the wind, dust and trash swirling across the concrete basin. But then I saw them, wet footprints, dozens of them, leading out from the center of the pool and splitting into different directions. Some toward the slides, some toward the locker rooms, some straight for the employee entrance gate. And they weren't child-sized. They were human, adult, bare feet, deep impressions, fresh. I followed them, slowly, with the flashlight bouncing in one hand and the crowbar I'd taken from the old maintenance shed in the other. They led me back to the Black Serpent, the tallest and most twisted slide in the park. The stairs were slick with algae. The padlock was gone again, of course, but the gate was also warped, as if someone had ripped it off its hinges and reattached it backwards. I climbed, 1 foot at a time, counting each rusted step and praying I wouldn't hear my name again. But I didn't. Not yet. Not until I reached the top platform and saw the mouth of the Black Serpent's tube yawning open like a wound. Then the air shifted. I felt it. Cold, wet breath sliding across my neck, even though I was alone. And the voice came not from the slide, but from directly behind me. "Let's go down together." It was me again. But this time, not just my voice. It was my voice overlaid with dozens of others. Layers upon layers of screams and whispers and cries, all saying the same thing in perfect unison. I turned around. Nothing there. But the railing was wet, dripping. The sky above the park had gone dark, even though it was barely past 7 p.m. And in the reflection of my flashlight on the tube entrance, I saw faces. Blurry, waterlogged faces pressed to the inside of the slide, mouths open, eyes blank, like drowning victims frozen mid-suffocation. I backed down the stairs as fast as I could without falling, and as I descended, every pipe, every water spout, every valve I passed began to tremble. The park was coming alive, not as it was, but as something else, something older, something hungry. And when I reached the ground, I saw the water shoes again, sitting at the bottom step, facing the slide, waiting. That night, I didn't make it back to the trailer. I couldn't bring myself to walk back down the main corridor of the park knowing those footprints were still out there. Knowing that the thing in the slides, the slick, the whispering mimic, had started leaving gifts for me. The water shoes were still there at the bottom of the stairs, but now they were accompanied by something else. A lanyard with a cracked ID badge dangling from it. When I leaned in to look, I recognized the name, Marcus Hill. The name on the badge was a match for the card I'd found earlier. Night Staff 01. His photo was sun-faded and water-damaged, eyes almost erased by a film of mildew trapped under the plastic. The badge shouldn't have been there. The logs in the binder said nothing about Marcus Hill leaving personal effects behind, and I sure as hell hadn't seen it when I checked the steps earlier that week. It had been placed there, left for me. I looked around in the dark, waiting for something to charge me or whisper my name again, but nothing came. That kind of silence is worse than sound, like the calm between waves where you know something is just beneath the surface. I pocketed the badge without thinking. I don't know why. Felt like a key, like a piece of the park was now part of me, and leaving it behind would have made things worse. I cut through the side paths, winding around the food court where everything had started to look warped. Benches tilted at strange angles, garbage bins bloated with rainwater that hadn't fallen, umbrellas open even though I never touched them. I didn't trust the trailer anymore. I didn't trust that it was empty when I wasn't in it. So I made a new base inside the first aid building behind the main office. It had a lock on the inside, no windows, and a half-broken defibrillator I could swing like a hammer if something decided to come through the door. I didn't sleep, but I felt safer with the smell of antiseptic and gauze. It reminded me of the real world, the world I wasn't sure existed anymore. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard something new. Not a voice, not a splash. Music. A tinny, broken loop of what sounded like the park's old theme song. Some steel drum jingle from the 2000s with whistling and kids cheering faintly behind it. It was playing from the PA system. The PA system that hadn't worked in years. I'd seen the switchboard myself, rusted and gutted in the operations shed with half its wires chewed through by rats. And yet there it was, blasting softly from the speakers above the lazy river, warped and dragging like it was being played off melting tape. Played for 7 minutes, and in that time I heard something move outside. Not quickly, slowly, like a procession, like a group of something that didn't need to hide anymore. I peered through the blinds and saw silhouettes winding along the path. Figures, dozens of them, shambling in wet, jerking movements like puppets underwater. They didn't look human, not fully. Some were too tall, some too short. Some moved on all fours, others staggered upright like drunks. Their skin shimmered under the emergency floodlights, not with sweat, with moisture, as if they had just come up from a pool that didn't exist. And leading them, barely visible at the front of the procession, was something crawling long, low, snake-like, dragging a body behind it that looked like a child's but bent like a broken doll. The music cut out mid-note. The figures all stopped. I ducked away from the window and didn't look again. I don't know how long they stayed. Hours maybe. I passed out from adrenaline and woke up at sunrise, throat dry and ears ringing from holding in every sound my body wanted to make. When I finally worked up the nerve to open the door, they were gone. But the ground was soaked, like every inch of the park had been submerged during the night and then drained before dawn. The air buzzed, literally, with flies, thousands of them, fat and bloated, hovering near the slides and locker rooms, chewing on the humidity. Something had changed. The water wasn't confined to the slides anymore. It had spread into the drains, into the gutters, into the very structure of the park. And with it came something worse, the memories. I started hearing conversations that never happened, smelling scents that didn't belong. Cotton candy, chlorine, sunscreen, and rot, all at once, layered, like time was folding in on itself. I walked past a broken drink stand and heard a kid yelling about a lost wristband. I turned the corner past the showers and heard 2 teens laughing about sneaking into the closed-off deep end. But there was no one there, not even echoes, just moments, residual memories bleeding into my reality. And in those memories, I kept hearing my own name, always distant, always like someone just missed me. That night, I went to the top of the Black Serpent with Marcus Hill's ID badge in hand. I don't know what I thought I would do. Confront the creature, bargain with it, demand answers. I was half insane with sleep deprivation and fear, and half under the spell of whatever the park had become. I climbed the steps, ignored the weeping that seemed to rise from the ground with every footfall, and stood before the gaping maw of the tunnel. I called into it. I said Marcus's name. I said mine. I asked what it wanted, and the voice that answered was not mine. Not the creature's, not a whisper, but a crowd. Hundreds of voices spoke in unison, pouring from the slide's depths like sewage. They said, "We are what was left behind." I ran, again, like always, but I didn't get far, because at the bottom of the stairs, standing just beyond the reach of the light, was a figure, soaking wet, pale, wearing a uniform like mine, with a name tag that read Marcus. He smiled at me, not a human smile, a slow, leaking stretch of skin across teeth that didn't seem like they should exist in that pattern. He didn't speak. He just stepped backward into the shadows, melting into the concrete like water absorbed by a sponge. I don't remember getting back to the first aid building. I barely remember the rest of that night. Only the dreams, endless corridors of fiberglass tubes, crawling forever, the sound of water always behind me, closer and closer and closer. And inside those dreams, the slides weren't plastic anymore. They were organic, pulsing, veined, alive, and they wanted me to go down. Just once, just one ride. That's all it would take. I told myself I'd never go down the slides. That was the line I drew, even after everything I'd seen. I could survive the whispers, the shadows, even the hallucinations, but if I ever crawled fully into one of those tunnels, if I let myself slide down into the core of this place, I knew I wouldn't come back. And yet, on the 12th night, I stood at the top of Neptune's drop with bare feet, my flashlight dead, the GoPro crushed under my boot from a fall I didn't remember taking, and the tunnel wide open in front of me, weeping moisture like a mouth salivating in anticipation. The air was thicker than usual. Breathing felt like sucking steam through a damp towel. The railing beside the slide trembled every few seconds, and the sounds beneath the fiberglass grew louder, scratching, gurgling, humming like an engine made of lungs. My legs ached from walking the park endlessly, night after night. My brain buzzed with the static of sleep deprivation, and the scent of chlorine rot had become a constant inside my nose. I didn't know how I'd gotten to the top. The last thing I remembered was locking myself inside the first aid building again. Then, I was just here. I had climbed, or something had walked me up here. Either way, my hands were on the edge of the tunnel, fingertips touching the cold, sticky interior, and I was leaning forward, body weight shifting toward gravity like my muscles had already decided. That's when I saw the reflection. It was in the surface of the water pooled unnaturally at the tunnel entrance. Not rain, not maintenance runoff. The water, that wrong, glistening fluid that never evaporated, never rippled right. It formed a perfect mirror. But my reflection wasn't me. It was Marcus. He looked tired, bloated, eyes ringed with dark bruises. His skin hung loose around his face like a wet towel thrown over bone. He reached up to the surface and touched the inside of the tunnel from beneath, mimicking my every move with perfect delay. But when I pulled back, he didn't. He smiled instead, gently, almost sadly, and then mouthed something I'll never forget. "Ride it out." That's all he said. No sound. Just those 3 words mouthed like a prayer. The tunnel beneath me pulsed. The pressure rose behind my ears. My knees buckled and I dropped into a crouch, breathing hard, gripping the lip of the tunnel as if it were the edge of a grave. And then I saw it again, that slick movement behind the reflection, a shape deeper in the water that wasn't part of either of us. A mouth but sideways, a body that didn't end. It unfurled like a shadow cast by light that didn't exist. Something ancient was coiled inside these slides. Not a ghost, not a creature, something bigger, a memory made physical, a hunger given shape. I crawled back, 1 inch at a time. I forced my hands to let go of the plastic and my legs to remember what it meant to run. I stumbled down the steps of Neptune's drop and collapsed at the bottom, sobbing. The concrete was warm beneath me, wet with a film of water that soaked into my shirt. But I didn't care. I pressed my face to the ground and let the tears fall freely until the sun began to rise and the smell of rot retreated. just slightly, with the heat. I quit the job that day. I drove to town, left the trailer behind with everything in it, and never looked back. At least I wanted to, but the park didn't let me go. Not really. Followed me. Not physically. Not in some cheesy horror movie way where you turn around and the monster's standing in your living room. No, it followed me in whispers, in dreams, in puddles that shouldn't exist, in hotel sinks that suddenly start to stink like dead water. I checked into a motel 3 towns over and tried to sleep for more than an hour at a time. I kept my phone off. I avoided mirrors, but every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the slides. Sliding, sliding, sliding. But the tunnels never ended. They changed mid-ride, twisting tighter, fleshier, the walls breathing with me, the echoes of children's laughter turning into screams, then silence, then the sound of my own voice calling back to me from ahead in the dark. I visited a doctor, got sleeping pills. They made things worse. Under medication, the dreams became clearer, sharper. I heard the water moving around me. I could taste it. Tasted like copper and mold. I started getting sick during the day, nosebleeds, dizziness, tremors. I went to urgent care. They found nothing wrong. I stopped showering. The water didn't feel right on my skin anymore. Too thick, too cold even when hot. Sometimes it smelled like the tunnels. Sometimes I swear it whispered. I kept Marcus's badge in my pocket. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I needed to remember. I had to. Because the more time passed, the more it felt like none of it had happened. Like Crystal Lagoon was a dream, but the badge was real. And every time I touched it, I remembered that thing's smile, that upside-down stretch of skin, that voice like mine, like all the others, wrapped into one long whisper that still pulsed behind my eardrums. Then came the letter. No return address, just my name in careful print. Inside was a single piece of damp paper, an old park flyer, one I hadn't seen before. It advertised a special attraction, something called the Final Descent. It was never built. It wasn't on the map. I checked every archive I could find online. No mention of it. But there it was, on that page, printed in faded ink. The Final Descent, one last ride into the depths. And below it, a photo of a new slide. One I hadn't seen at the park. Longer than the rest, blacker, smoother, like obsidian or oil. It twisted down into what looked like a sinkhole, disappearing into the earth itself. The flyer smelled like the water. That night I dreamed of it. The slide, the final descent. And at the bottom, waiting for me, was myself, drenched, smiling, waving me down like it was all okay now. And I started to wonder, maybe that's all this is, a ride. A really, really long ride. A ride that starts when you agree to stay after hours, when you hear your name in a tunnel, when you follow a trail of wet footprints instead of turning away. A ride you don't remember getting on. A ride that never ends. And part of me is starting to think it wants me to finish it. Just one more shift, one more night, one more slide. The Final Descent wasn't on any map, not in the old park brochures, not on the blueprint I found buried in archived zoning documents from the county office. I drove out there during daylight, half mad with curiosity and a buzzing behind my eyes that wouldn't stop unless I saw it for myself. My palms were sweating so much on the steering wheel I thought I'd lose my grip. Crystal Lagoon hadn't changed, not in the way time changes things, but it felt older somehow. Like now I was seeing it without its mask. The rusted gates looked like jaws. The once fun octopus statue near the kiddie pool looked deflated and half-melted, its plastic eyes sagging like they were tired of watching. But it was the slides that had changed most of all. They weren't just decaying, they were pulsing. The black serpent bulged in the middle like something was stuck inside. Coral coil had collapsed in on itself, its twists and turns flattened into a crumpled spiral like a crushed intestine. The gates were gone, the padlocks snapped, and the fences torn outward, like something exited the tunnels and didn't care what it destroyed on its way out. I told myself I was there to get closure, that if I could find this final descent, take one photo, maybe even record the site, I'd finally be free of the nightmares. But even in daylight, I could hear it, the music, faintly, from somewhere underground. Not the usual steel drums. Something lower, slower, like a lullaby meant for things that live in basements and feed on memory. I wandered past the wave pool, past the food court, past the first aid building with its door now hanging loose on its hinges, as if someone had forced their way in and out. Then I saw it. The tunnel. At the far back of the park, behind a fake rock formation I'd never thought to check before. There was a service road that led to what looked like a concrete slope covered in vines and old caution tape. Someone or something had torn the vines aside recently. The concrete wasn't natural. It was molded, sculpted into the shape of a wide flume spiraling downward at a slow, steady incline. The walls slick and black and somehow wet, even in the dry heat of day. My feet carried me forward before my brain could say no. Every instinct screamed to turn back. I didn't listen. The final descent had no stairs, no platform, no warning signs. Just a tunnel opening into the earth, gaping like a mouth that hadn't eaten in a long, long time. I peered inside. It wasn't dark. There was light deep within, faint, greenish, and flickering like bioluminescent algae. The walls of the tunnel shimmered with moisture, but also with movement. Little ripples danced across the surface like wind over skin. And then I saw something crawl across the inner curve. A shadow no bigger than a child, running upward inside the tunnel like gravity didn't apply. It didn't look at me, but it knew I was there. I backed away, heart pounding in my throat. But before I turned to leave, I noticed a plaque on the outer wall of the tunnel, half hidden by grime and dust. I wiped it clean with my sleeve. It was bronze, older than the park itself. The inscription read, Crystal Lagoon Expansion Project, in memory of those who never came back. I stared at that plaque for a long time. Something deep inside me knew that Crystal Lagoon wasn't just a failed water park. It had always been something else. Maybe the park was just a mask, a cover-up, a way to build over what couldn't be explained, a way to trap whatever lived beneath. Maybe the final descent wasn't an attraction that was forgotten, but one that was sealed away until someone opened it. Someone like Marcus, or me. That night, I didn't go back to the motel. I drove in circles for hours, trying to find a place where the air didn't smell like chlorine and mildew, where puddles didn't form on clean floors, where my reflection didn't twitch when I didn't. But there was nowhere left. Whatever Crystal Lagoon was, it wasn't just in the forest. It was in me now. It was following. Every whisper I'd ever heard in the tunnels, every face I'd seen in the water, they were still here. I saw Marcus in my bathroom mirror, standing behind me with empty eyes and a mouth that never stopped smiling. I saw the children at the bottom of my motel pool, eyes wide open, hair floating like weeds, mouths screaming without sound. I saw my own hands begin to prune even when they were dry. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The park didn't just want me to see the final descent. It wanted me to take the ride. I thought I'd resist. I thought I'd fight. But I'm so tired. I've run so far. And every night, that tunnel shows up in my dreams. A perfect spiral of darkness and dripping memory. It whispers my name in my own voice. Promises answers. Peace. Reunion. I think I understand now. This isn't a haunting. It's a process. A long, slow slide into something older than fear, older than language. The slides weren't built to thrill. They were built to feed. The creatures in them aren't monsters. They're echoes, leftovers of everyone who ever rode them and never came back. People like Marcus, people like me. I can feel it pulling now. In my bones, my blood. Every drop of moisture in my body wants to return, to descend. So maybe I will. Maybe I'll go back one more time. Maybe I'll walk the path again, barefoot, and lay my badge at the base of the final descent. Maybe I'll slide. And if I do, if I let myself go all the way down this time, I hope there's something at the bottom besides teeth and whispers. I hope there's understanding. I hope there's silence. And if not, then I'll become part of the water. Another ripple, another voice, another name in the drain. I waited until midnight. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like the right hour, the kind of time when thresholds are thinner and decisions become irreversible. Maybe because I knew, somehow, that the park would be awake by then, pulsing with all the unseen things that moved through the pipes like blood in veins. I drove back in silence. No radio, no thoughts, just the hum of the engine and the feeling of my heartbeat in my hands. The roads felt longer than usual, curving in places they shouldn't, lined with trees that pressed closer to the asphalt as if they were leaning in to watch me pass. The park loomed ahead like a cathedral built to forgetfulness, an abandoned sanctuary where every ride was a prayer and every scream was a hymn. Crystal Lagoon, my final destination. I didn't bother locking my car. I walked past the front gates like they weren't even there. The moon overhead had turned a sickly yellow, hidden behind low clouds that dragged across the sky like wet gauze. The slides no longer looked plastic. They looked grown, like coral reefs made of meat and time. Their surfaces glistened even without light. They bent in ways that betrayed their structure, flexing subtly as if stretching after a long sleep. I passed the black serpent and it shuddered. The coral coil exhaled a long, slow breath of mist from its entrance, warm and wet like a sigh. I didn't stop. I didn't flinch. I was beyond that now. At the back of the park, behind the rock wall where I'd found the tunnel days earlier, the earth had shifted. The final descent wasn't just open, it had emerged. The concrete slope had split wider, as if pushed outward from below, the black flume now twice the size I remembered, gaping into the earth like a vein split open. I stood before it and dropped Marcus's badge into the mouth of the slide. It vanished without a sound. The tunnel pulsed once in acknowledgement. And then, without a word, I stepped inside. The world behind me vanished the moment my foot crossed the threshold. No stars, no air, just the tunnel, just down. I didn't slide, not in the normal sense. It felt like I was drawn, pulled forward by something warm and slow, like sinking into thick syrup. The walls around me contracted and expanded, matching the rhythm of my lungs. I wasn't moving under my own power. The tunnel was riding me. The deeper I went, the more I remembered things I shouldn't. Conversations from childhood, smells from houses I'd only lived in briefly, names I hadn't thought about in decades. Every few feet, I passed openings. Tiny alcoves in the flume where faces stared out, motionless, watching. Their eyes blinked in slow, unnatural rhythms. Some were smiling, some were crying, some were mouthing words I couldn't hear. I recognized a few. One looked like the teenage girl from the faded park mural. Another wore a lifeguard badge from the early 90s. And one of them was me. Not the me from last week. Not even from last year. It was a version of me that looked worn, like I'd been down here far longer than I knew. His skin was pale, soaked, sagging slightly like fruit left to rot. He reached out a hand as I passed, but the tunnel pulled me onward before I could touch him. Downward, deeper, slower now. The tunnel widened until it opened into a vast chamber, like the inside of a buried cathedral carved from obsidian and bone. The floor below me wasn't solid. It was water, but not any water I'd ever seen. It moved in geometric patterns, rippling in circles that folded into themselves. At the center was a hole, perfect circular pit, and I knew that was where it ended. The final descent didn't lead to another slide or ride or pool. It led here, to the heart. I lowered myself into the water. It was warm, not soothing, intimate, like it had been waiting specifically for me. Every drop that touched my skin carried a memory. Someone else's memory, dozens at once. A mother looking for her son at closing time. A security guard hearing a splash from an empty pool. A child screaming from inside a tube while his friend waited at the bottom, only to realize he never came out. I felt them, all of them, every lost person who had ever disappeared into the slides. They weren't dead, not exactly. They were absorbed, remembered, folded into this place, this thing, this system that wasn't a park at all. The final descent wasn't an attraction. It was a feeding tube, a filtration system for memory and identity and fear. It devoured the things you thought were yours and left behind only the parts it liked. I reached the edge of the hole, looked down. There was no bottom, just more water, more movement, more faces rising slowly to the surface. I saw Marcus. I saw my mother. I saw myself again. 1,000 versions. All of them smiling now. All of them ready. And then the voice came. Not from the tunnel this time. Not from the water. But from inside me. It spoke through my own lungs, using my breath to say, "You rode the ride. You took the shift. Now you are part of the park." The water rose, covered my legs, my chest, my chin. "You remember now, so we will remember you." The last thing I saw was the ceiling of the chamber blinking like a sky full of wet eyes. And then, silence that I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't pass the same way anymore. But I still hear the slides. I feel them pulsing around me. I hear new voices coming down the flumes, new guards, new kids, new curiosity. And when they ride too deep, when they go too far, I'll be here, waiting, watching, whispering. So if you ever take a night shift at a place like this, if you ever hear something moving inside a slide after midnight, if you hear your own voice calling from the dark, don't write it out, because the final descent doesn't end. Only adds. Story 2. We weren't even supposed to be staying at that hotel. That's the part that still gets under my skin. How small the decision was, how casually we made it. My girlfriend Jess and I were driving back from a wedding in South Carolina, and after 12 straight hours on the road, we were dead tired. The plan had been to push through until we reached her sister's house in Richmond, but around 9 p.m., a storm rolled in. Sheets of rain, thunder that cracked like bone, and lightning so bright it made your eyes ache. We passed a couple exits without any motels, then finally spotted a weather-beaten sign on the right side of the highway that just said, "Brookside in vacancy." We weren't picky. We pulled off, drove a half-mile down a tree-choked service road, and found the place nestled in a patch of overgrown brush like it had been forgotten by time. The parking lot was empty except for a silver SUV with out-of-state plates, and the building itself was low and flat with stucco walls, brown trim, and a mossy green roof. The fluorescent open sign in the office window flickered as we pulled up. The lobby was just a glass enclosure with a plastic bell on the counter and a coffee machine that hadn't been cleaned in years. A man in his 50s appeared from a back room when we rang. I don't remember much about him. Balding, pale, smelled faintly of tobacco, but I do remember how quickly he handed us a key. Actual key, not a card. Room 13. I made a joke about the number. Jess didn't laugh. We walked through the rain to the far corner of the motel, where room 13 waited under a flickering bulb that buzzed constantly. The room was fine, cleanish, beige wallpaper with a vine pattern, brown carpet, an ancient box TV bolted to a dresser. The bedspread was stiff but dry. The window didn't lock, but we were exhausted. Jess showered first while I unpacked our overnight bags, and I kept hearing this weird thudding sound behind the mirror above the dresser. Not loud, just soft, rhythmic, like something lightly knocking once every 10 seconds. I thought maybe it was plumbing, or maybe the wind hitting the building in a weird way. But it stopped the moment I got close, and that was just the first thing. Later, as we were brushing our teeth, Jess stopped mid-rinse and stared at the mirror, toothbrush still in her mouth. I asked what was wrong, and she slowly reached out and tapped the glass with her nail. A hollow sound echoed back. Not the kind you'd expect from glass over drywall, but the dull, muffled thunk of something deeper. She tapped again, harder. Same sound. I leaned in and placed my palm against it. Cold. Too cold. Like touching metal kept in a freezer. We both looked at each other. No words. Just a silent agreement to try something. I checked the mirror's edge and found that it wasn't secured to the wall properly. The bottom left corner wiggled when I pulled. Jess grabbed the other side, and with a little effort we tilted it out, revealing a dark gap behind it. A square cutout in the wall. A hole. Not drywall. Not wiring. Just blackness. I pulled out my phone and shined the flashlight into it. What we saw wasn't a crawl space. It wasn't insulation. It was a tunnel. Long, narrow, and lined with stained concrete. It ran straight back, disappearing into the dark. Jess said no. Immediately, her voice cracked a little. She wanted to close the mirror and forget it. But something about that tunnel, it pulled at me. Not curiosity, not exactly. More like a memory I didn't have yet. I promised I'd only check it for a second. Just crawl in a few feet, take a quick look, come back out. Jess begged me not to. I kissed her forehead, told her to keep her phone nearby, and climbed up onto the dresser. The tunnel smelled like earth and mildew, like a storm drain that hadn't seen water in years. The floor was hard, rough concrete. The walls were uneven, as if dug by hand. I crawled in about 6 feet before turning back to shine my light behind me. Jess was staring in, her face pale, lips trembling. I smiled at her and told her I was okay. Then I turned forward again and nearly screamed. There were handprints on the walls, dozens of them. Small, dark smears left in the dust. Some fresh, some old. Fingertips dragged down the walls like someone had clawed at them while crawling. I turned to back out. I'd gone far enough. But something was behind me. Something heavy moved in the darkness beyond Jess. And I heard her scream just as the mirror slammed shut, plunging the tunnel into blackness. At first I thought she had just dropped the mirror. Or maybe it had slipped and swung shut under its own weight. I shouted her name twice, then 3 times, but the sound bounced down the tunnel like it was being swallowed instead of echoed. I spun around, crawling back toward the opening, and slammed my palms against the flat black surface where the mirror had been. It was gone. Not broken, gone. Smooth, seamless wall. I clawed at it, my breath already coming in panicked bursts. The cold concrete seemed to absorb my heat with every second I touched it. The air inside the tunnel wasn't just stale, it was wrong, like it hadn't been touched by oxygen in years. I shouted louder, pounding harder, until the skin on my knuckles cracked. Nothing, just darkness and a silence so thick I could hear the blood moving behind my eyes. I scrambled backwards, half crawling, half sliding until I could sit upright against the curved wall. My flashlight flickered once, then again. I smacked it with my palm and it steadied, but only barely. I didn't want to go deeper. Every cell in my body screamed to stay put, to wait, to hope. But hope is fragile in the dark. Time stretched. My sense of direction faded. And then, footsteps. Behind me. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just soft, deliberate, uneven. A shuffle, a drag. A slow placement of weight. I twisted around and aimed the beam behind me. Empty. But the sound didn't stop. It moved. Side to side. Closer. Then silence. I whispered Jess's name again. This time as a prayer. Then I started crawling forward, deeper into the tunnel, telling myself there had to be another way out. Or at least a junction, something. Anything. The walls began to shift. First in texture, then in color. From raw concrete to something smoother, like old tile caked in layers of grime. Water stains, cracks filled with black mold. I passed an opening to the left, just wide enough to squeeze through, but I kept going. I didn't want to go sideways. I wanted out, but the tunnel had other plans. I reached a point where the floor dipped downward, steep enough that I had to slow down to keep from tumbling. I slid in places, hands scraping along the walls, breath clouding in front of my face even though it was suddenly hot. Not warm, hot, like I'd stepped into a furnace that had been off just long enough to stop glowing. The tunnel widened again, and that's when I saw the first door. Not a door exactly, a hatch, like one you'd find on a submarine, round and bolted with a rusted iron wheel. There was no writing, no markings, just the faint imprint of something that looked like fingerprints along the edges, smudged and long dried. I considered opening it. I don't know why. Maybe because I thought it was the only path forward. Maybe because some part of me believed that Jess might have been pulled through the same way. But when I put my hand on the wheel, the metal burned me. Not like heat, like cold flame. It seared into the top layer of skin and made me jerk my hand back. And in the second I did, the tunnel breathed. That's the only way I can describe it. The walls expanded just slightly, like lungs inflating. A long, low groan followed, like something huge had shifted deeper inside. I collapsed forward and kept crawling, this time not stopping for anything. I passed 2 more side tunnels, both narrower, and in one of them I saw a shape retreating. A flash of something pale and long and wet, like a skinned animal walking upright. It didn't make a sound, but the smell it left behind was unbearable. A sour, metallic stench like rotting teeth and boiling blood. I gagged and kept moving. My flashlight was flickering again, but it was enough to catch the next chamber up ahead. I call it a chamber because the tunnel widened abruptly into a space maybe 20 feet across and 12 feet high, with curved ceilings and cracked tile along every surface. And in the middle was a pile, a mound of fabric and personal items, like a lost and found thrown into a pit. Bags, shoes, wallets, phones, all of them stacked haphazardly, some half-rotted, some pristine. And the worst part, they were still buzzing. A dozen phones in that pile were vibrating. No rings, just gentle, rhythmic hums like they were receiving silent notifications one after another. I stepped closer, numb now. One of the phones had a lock screen still active. I lifted it carefully. The wallpaper was a family photo. A man, a woman, and a kid with front teeth missing. The battery icon flashed red, and then it died in my hand. I dropped it and turned toward the far wall, where something else caught my eye. A mirror, standing upright, not bolted, just placed against the tile like it had been dragged there. The glass was intact, and for the briefest second I saw my reflection. But it blinked before I did. I jumped back, smiled. Not a full smile, just the idea of one. Like the corners of its mouth twitched up just enough to hint at recognition. Then it reached toward me. My actual hands were at my sides, but the reflection raised its arms and pressed them to the glass. I turned and ran, not bothering to pick a direction, just bolting toward the far end of the chamber and diving into another tunnel without looking. I fell hard, slid for what felt like forever, the floor slick and wet and steep. I tried to slow myself, but the walls offered no grip. I was screaming the whole way down, not for help, not out of fear, just a raw, animal sound, like my body was trying to escape my own voice. When I finally landed, it wasn't on concrete. It was on carpet, thin, damp carpet. I rolled over and looked around, confused, dizzy. I was in another room, a hotel room, same wallpaper, same furniture, same mirror above the dresser, but not my room. This one was trashed. The bed was overturned, the window shattered. Black smears covered the walls in long, chaotic streaks. The mirror was cracked, and the tunnel behind it was gone. I tried the door, locked. The handle broke in my hand. No phone, no light, just a buzzing, humming sound behind the wall that was growing louder with every breath. I called out again, this time not for Jess, but for anyone. The mirror behind me creaked, and in its reflection I saw movement. Not in the room, in the glass. I turned. Nothing there, but the reflection still showed it. A long, tall shape, walking toward me on limbs that bent the wrong way, face blurred like a smear on a wet photograph. I backed into the bathroom and slammed the door, locked it, crawled into the bathtub and waited. My flashlight gave out. The sound behind the wall grew louder. Something thudded against the mirror once, twice, 3 times. I shut my eyes. I didn't want to see what came through. I don't know how long I was in that bathtub. Hours, maybe. Days. Time lost all structure the moment that thing began pressing against the other side of the mirror. It would knock 3 slow, deliberate thuds, then pause, as if listening for movement. My breath became shallow, controlled. I didn't dare let it hear me breathe. I curled my body into the far corner of the tub and buried my face against the wall, hands over my ears, trying to drown it out. But you can't drown out something that doesn't make noise the way we do. That third knock wasn't a hand. It was a call, and something answered it from the walls. I felt it behind the tile, a vibration, like a slow drag of fingernails across stone. I pressed both palms flat to the porcelain beneath me just to anchor myself to something real, and even that wasn't safe. The tub vibrated too, like something deep beneath the hotel was breathing through the pipes. I must have passed out, maybe from the fear or the exhaustion, or the black mold in the air thickening every second. When I came to, the knocking had stopped, but now there was a noise coming from the other side of the door. A voice. It wasn't calling my name. It was whispering something low and frantic, Words I couldn't make out, like a mantra repeated so often it had become meaningless. But the tone wasn't human. It had that warble of something trying too hard to imitate speech, like an animal that had heard language once and was trying to copy it. I leaned toward the bathroom door, as slowly as I could, and held my ear just inches from the wood. I didn't want to, but I needed to hear it clearly. The voice said, "He's here now. He's in the walls. He opened it. We're not sealed anymore." Then silence. I yanked back. My elbow slammed the towel rack. The metal clanged against tile with a deafening echo, and instantly I heard the thing run. No mistaking it. It sprinted across the hotel room toward the bathroom door in a series of wet, galloping steps like knuckles slapping linoleum. Then it hit the door. Full force. I saw the hinges bend inward. It screamed, not with vocal cords, but with wind. A blast of warm, humid air howled through the cracks, and I felt my mouth dry up instantly. I collapsed back into the tub, staring at the ceiling, knowing I couldn't stay in that room. That door wouldn't hold. And that's when I remembered the air vent. Above the mirror in the bathroom, near the ceiling, there was a rectangular air vent just barely large enough for a body. I scrambled up, using the towel rack to steady myself, then pulled myself onto the sink and wedged my shoulder against the vent cover. Rust gave way faster than I expected, and the metal frame popped loose with a screech. I tossed it into the sink, shoved my flashlight, barely flickering now, into the hole and crawled in headfirst. The vent was suffocating. Dust coated every surface like fine sandpaper, and the smell was beyond rot. It was history, like the scent of forgotten places, things that should have been buried but weren't. I crawled as fast as I could. Behind me, the bathroom door exploded inward. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it. I just moved. The vent sloped downward. I thought I'd end up in another room, but instead, it opened into another tunnel. Same concrete, same walls, same wrong feeling in the air. I dropped into it, twisting my ankle when I hit the floor, but adrenaline drowned the pain. I got to my feet and limped forward. The tunnel here was different. It didn't feel like a maintenance shaft. It felt deliberate, ritualistic. The walls were lined with scratches, hundreds of them, overlapping in chaotic spirals, like someone had carved sigils with their bare nails. Some were recent, some still had flakes of skin in them, and there were messages, written in marker, carved into stone, smeared in what I hope was old paint. He sees through the mirror. Don't let him reflect. It doesn't end, it loops. You have to break the glass before it breaks you. I kept walking. My flashlight flickered out completely. I turned my phone screen on for light, but the battery was nearly dead. That's when I saw a faint glow ahead, a pale greenish hue, like emergency lighting covered in moss. I limped toward it. The tunnel opened into another room, but it wasn't part of the hotel anymore. It looked like a maintenance control center or maybe a bomb shelter. Bare metal walls, flickering bulbs, broken monitors lining one side. In the center of the room was a chair, a high-backed, bolted-down metal chair with straps dangling from the arms. Someone was sitting in it. I froze. My light illuminated the back of their head. Shaved scalp, pale skin, unmoving. I whispered, asking if they were okay. No response. I took a step closer. That's when I realized the chair was bolted to the floor because it was part of the room, part of whatever this place was trying to do. And the person in it wasn't alive. Their mouth was open, a scream frozen in death. Their eyes had been replaced with shards of mirror. Not glued, not surgically, just inserted, as if the flesh had made space for it willingly. Their arms were raw where the straps had cut in, their wrists broken from struggling, and beneath their feet, etched into the floor, was a symbol I didn't recognize. A spiral inside a triangle. Lines that looked like water flowing up instead of down. Around it were 4 words scratched over and over again in different handwriting. No way back, no way back, no way back. I turned to leave and saw the mirrors. Every wall, every surface was lined with them. Hundreds of mirrors, some framed, some broken, some so old they barely reflected. and in each one a different version of the room, different chairs, different bodies, and in one of them, Jess. She stood behind a mirror that showed a hallway I'd never seen. She was screaming, pounding on the glass, but there was no sound, just the wild panic in her eyes. She looked right at me, reached out. Her fingertips pressed to the other side of the glass and my hand went up instinctively to meet it. The mirror was warm. Then she vanished, the mirror cracked, and I was alone again. Something growled behind the mirrors, low, deep, and wet, like a throat full of water. I ran, limped, crawled. I didn't care. I just moved. I passed through another door and back into the tunnel and kept running until my lungs felt like they were bleeding. Eventually, the tunnel curved upward, steeply, and I followed it without thinking. The light grew brighter. Real light this time, sunlight, leaking through a small square at the top of a ladder. I climbed, fast, every rung groaning under my weight. I didn't stop to wonder where I'd end up. When I pushed open the hatch, I fell out onto concrete that I was outside, behind the Brookside Inn. The building looked different now, older, grayer, as if decades had passed. The windows were all bricked up. The neon sign was missing letters. My car was gone. Jess was gone. And behind me, the hatch slammed shut on its own that I was out. But I wasn't safe, because when I walked around to the front of the building, there was a new vacancy sign in the window. The lobby lights flickered on, and my reflection in the office door wasn't mine at IT was still wearing my clothes, still shaped like me. But it was smiling, and I wasn't. I didn't go inside, not at first. I stood frozen in the overgrown gravel lot, rain still clinging to the edges of the pavement like the storm hadn't really left. The air around the Brookside Inn felt heavier now, like something had settled over the building, pressing it downward into the earth like a thumb on rotting fruit. The vacancy sign in the window didn't flicker anymore. It glowed steady, soft, like it was inviting me back. But the reflection in the glass, the one pretending to be me, hadn't moved. It still wore my clothes, still mimicked my posture, but its face had changed. The smile had widened slightly. The eyes were colder, deader. And then, without me moving, it lifted its hand and waved. That was the moment something broke inside me. Not fear, not shock, but this deeper, corrosive certainty that I had left something important behind. Jess was still in there. I knew it now with a kind of sick clarity. Whatever force was behind the mirrors, it hadn't let her go. I don't know how I escaped the first time, but I had no illusions about this being freedom. If anything, it was an intermission, a breath between acts. I had to go back in, but this time I wasn't going through the front. I circled around the side of the motel, past the boarded-up windows, the collapsed soda machine, and the weeping air conditioner units that still buzzed like dying cicadas. Around back, the hatch I'd climbed through had vanished beneath a thick mat of ivy and moss. It was gone, sealed like it had never existed. But there was a narrow basement-level service door half hidden behind a stack of rain-rotted pallets. It was chained but not locked. I pulled the links loose and eased it open, stepping into a hallway so black it felt like stepping inside a mouth. The air was worse down here, not just stagnant, but soupy, filled with this oily humidity that coated my tongue and made each breath taste like metal. I turned on my phone's flashlight again, now at 2% battery, and in its dying glow I saw the walls were covered in strange stains. Not mold, at least not the kind I'd seen before. These were shapes, patterns. Some looked like eyes, others like hands. Some were just spirals that spun outward across the wall like something had traced them obsessively over and over until they were burned into the surface. At the far end of the hall was an elevator. Old, rusted, the kind with the scissor-style gate and the up/down switch. I pressed the button and was sure it wouldn't work, but it did. With a mechanical clunk, the gate slid open and the elevator creaked down to meet me. Inside, there was only one floor marked on the panel, B2. Below basement, below everything. I didn't hesitate. The ride down took longer than it should have. Minutes, maybe. I kept expecting it to jam or to fall or to grind to a halt and leave me stranded. But it didn't. When the doors opened, I stepped out into a space that made no architectural sense. A massive atrium, cavernous and circular, like something carved out of stone rather than built. The ceiling arched high overhead and disappeared into mist. And the walls, they were entirely mirrors, thousands of them, stacked in layers, spiraling upward like the inside of a lighthouse made of glass. Each mirror reflected something slightly different. Sometimes the space behind me, sometimes other rooms, sometimes things that didn't exist in the real world at all. I walked forward, drawn toward the center, where a platform rose from the floor like an altar, and on that platform was a chair. Not like the one I'd seen earlier. This one was elegant, carved from some kind of dark, oily wood with veins of silver threading through it. There were no straps, but I knew what it was for as I approached. The mirrors around the room began to flicker. Not physically, just their contents. Reflections blurred, swirled, and shifted, showing scenes I didn't recognize. Cities I'd never visited, people I'd never met. But in every one of them, there was a version of me. Sometimes I was clean-cut, sometimes bearded, sometimes smiling with teeth that weren't mine. Sometimes I was screaming, bleeding, covered in ash. Sometimes I was with Jess in one reflection. She held my hand. In another, she was pulling away in one. She was holding something. Our child that's when I realized what this place was. It wasn't just a tunnel. It wasn't just a trap. It was a nexus, a convergence point for infinite mirrors. Every possible version of reality, every failed escape, every forgotten guest. The Brookside Inn wasn't built on cursed land. The inn was the curse. The building itself was the door, the mirror, the aperture through which these fragmented worlds bled together. And when you opened the wrong mirror, when you followed the tunnel instead of staying in bed or calling the front desk or simply leaving, you got pulled in, slotted into whichever empty version of yourself had been left behind last time. I turned from the platform and tried to leave. I didn't want to know what my place in this was. I didn't want to sit in the chair. But I wasn't alone anymore. From the mirrors, dozens of versions of me stepped forward. Their movements were mirrored but wrong, too smooth, too fluid. Their faces were blank, their eyes hollow, and at their feet, crawling silently, were hundreds of others. Not me, them, yes, victims, people from decades ago, people dressed in modern clothes. Some had no faces, some had no mouths, but all of them moved as one, a swarm of reflections spilling out of the glass and onto the floor, and every one of them was coming toward me. I ran. The atrium had exits, at least a dozen. I chose one at random and sprinted through it, finding myself in another hallway that looked exactly like the one from our original room. The same peeling wallpaper, same red-stained carpet, same soft whisper of wind from nowhere. I opened one door after another. Some led to normal rooms. Some led to mirrors. Some led to black tunnels filled with whispering mouths. In one, I saw a version of Jess curled up in bed, clutching a note. In another, I saw myself strung up by my ankles in a corner of the ceiling, eyes missing. Every door was a possibility. Every room a threat. I kept moving, faster. Then I found it. Room 13. Our room 13. The number was scorched into the doorframe now, as if burned there by something molten. I opened the door and stepped inside. Jess was there, standing in front of the mirror. She turned, eyes wide, lips parted, but before she could say anything, her reflection reached out of the glass and grabbed her, pulled her halfway back in. She screamed. I didn't think. I ran to her, grabbed her waist, pulled with everything I had. The thing in the mirror was stronger. Its hand was cracked, bleeding glass, but it pulled with purpose, with direction. I reached up, grabbed the lamp off the nightstand, and smashed it against the mirror. The glass shattered outward, light, real light, flooded the room, and everything stopped. Jess collapsed into my arms. The room flickered, and suddenly, it was day. Clear, blinding daylight streamed through the window. The room was clean, whole. The mirror replaced. Jess breathed shallowly against my chest. Alive. We didn't talk. We left everything behind. Phones, bags, IDs. We just walked out. The man at the front desk wasn't there anymore. The lot was full of cars we didn't recognize, and the sign, It didn't say vacancy. It said, "No mirrors left." We didn't make it far. We left the Brookside Inn behind us, got in a car that wasn't ours. An old maroon Honda with the keys still in the ignition, no license plate, no registration in the glove box, and drove. I don't even remember choosing a direction, just away. Every mile put more distance between us and that motel, and still I couldn't stop checking the mirrors. The rear view showed nothing at first. Then, around the third hour, I started seeing flickers. A shape in the back seat that wasn't really there. A hand reaching for my shoulder that vanished every time I turned. Jess was in the passenger seat, silent, staring out the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to hold her body together. I didn't speak to her for a long time because I was scared my voice would break whatever fragile thing had glued us back to this world. Around noon, we stopped for gas in a small town. There were people there, real people, cashier, a kid on a bike, a woman filling her tank 2 pumps over. I remember standing in the fluorescent light of the mini-mart, thinking I could almost believe none of it had happened, that we'd just had a bad night, slept in the car, hallucinated the rest. I bought a disposable phone, paid cash, called my brother, asked him to come get us. He said he would. But then Jess said something that froze me in place. She hadn't moved in 10 minutes. She was sitting on the curb, staring at the car's side mirror. And she whispered, "It's blinking." I knelt beside her and followed her gaze. And she was right. The reflection of the gas station in the mirror wasn't still. It was moving. The pumps were wobbling. The sky was flickering between overcast and blue. And then, the version of me in the mirror turned around and looked directly at me. I grabbed Jess and we ran. Left the car. Left everything again. I didn't know where to go, so we found a motel off a side road. One with no mirrors. That was our only condition. The woman at the front desk gave us a funny look when I asked, but she didn't question it. Room 9. No mirror above the sink. None in the bedroom. Just blank walls and a single, yellowing window. We locked the door. Pulled the dresser in front of it. Sat on the bed in silence. Then Jess started talking. She told me things I wish I hadn't heard. She said the thing that grabbed her wasn't just in the mirror. It was the mirror. That when it pulled her in, she didn't just see reflections. She saw versions. Worlds stacked on top of each other like panes of glass. All identical but slightly warped. Some where we never checked into the motel. Some where we died. Some where she never existed and I walked the tunnel alone. She said the longer she was inside, the harder it was to remember which version was real. And then she told me something that made my blood freeze. She said she wasn't sure if she got out. She didn't remember the moment the glass broke. She didn't remember me pulling her back. She said something else might have taken her place that I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream, but deep down, I knew what she meant, because I'd been wondering the same thing about myself. The next few days were a blur. We kept moving. Cheap motels, abandoned cabins. One night in a tent behind a gas station. We avoided all reflective surfaces. I covered the mirrors in the bathrooms with duct tape or bed sheets. I smashed a rear view once just because I thought I saw my face smile when I wasn't. But it wasn't enough. They followed. Not the creatures. Not the things with backwards limbs or eyeless grins. The versions. The echoes. They started appearing in windows. In store glass. In puddles after rain. I'd catch a glimpse and realize the reflection was lagging. Or staring. Or missing altogether. Then came the calls. Blocked numbers. Always at night. I answered once. Just once. It was Jess. But not this Jess. She was sobbing, whispering my name, begging me to come find her, saying she was still trapped, that I left her behind. The Jess in bed beside me never moved. The reflection in the motel TV screen smiled. We started seeing others, too. People like us. In diners. On buses. Eyes hollow. Avoiding their own reflections. Once, we met a woman in a rest stop bathroom covering the mirrors with toilet paper. She looked at Jess and said, "You're not the only one who got pulled back wrong." She left without another word. Eventually, we stopped running. We ran out of money, out of places that didn't have mirrors. You don't realize how many there are. In phones, windows, Watch faces. Sunglasses. We couldn't hide forever. And I think that's the point. We're not meant to escape. The mirrors don't trap you. They replace you. Every reflection is a door, and behind every door is something waiting. Something watching. Waiting for you to look too long. Waiting for you to believe what you see, because when you do, when you finally accept the thing in the glass as you, that's when it comes through and takes your place. So if you ever find a hidden tunnel behind a mirror, or hear a sound in the wall, or catch your reflection moving out of sync, don't investigate. Don't hesitate, and whatever you do, don't break the glass, because something might be looking for a way out, and it's already seen how you move. It wasn't long before I started having the dreams. Not regular dreams. Not the fleeting kind that dissolve the moment you wake up. These were rooted, deep, like tumors in the brain, growing stronger each night until they bled into waking life. The first dream dropped me back into the atrium of mirrors beneath the Brookside Inn. Except this time I wasn't standing. I was floating, weightless, suspended like a mote of dust in a shaft of moonlight. The air was gelatinous. Sound didn't travel right. And all around me, the mirrors pulsed with dim, internal light. They were watching me, not showing anything, just watching. I tried to scream, but I didn't have a mouth. I didn't have a body. I was nothing but thought and fear and memory. And even that began to splinter the longer I drifted. I don't know how I got out. I woke up in a cold sweat, clutching Jess's arm, but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to herself. The room was freezing, and the windows were fogged over from the inside, even though it was a summer night. Her voice was low, rhythmic. I leaned in, trying to hear, and what she was saying made my bones lock up. 7 mirrors, 7 doors, one for each version of the soul. She kept repeating it, over and over, even after I shook her, even after I yelled her name. When she finally blinked and came back to herself, she didn't remember any of it. Not the whispering, not the freezing cold, not the dream, but I did. And I knew deep down that it hadn't come from her. Not this version. Something else had crept in. Something she carried back with her when I shattered the mirror and pulled her out. We needed answers. We drove to libraries, archives, abandoned records offices in the middle of nowhere. I dug through building plans, motel registries, urban legends. Anything that might explain what the Brookside Inn really was, or had been before it started swallowing people. I found whispers, local blogs, conspiracy forums, scanned police reports with redacted names. Missing persons reports dated years apart, but always with the same location listed as last seen. County Road 209, mile marker 13. Eventually, I found a man named Harold Greeley, 74 years old, a retired building inspector from upstate who'd had a breakdown in 1983 after surveying the foundations of several older motels, including Brookside. I found his contact info buried in an old alumni registry. When I called him, he hung up the first time. I called back. He didn't answer. I waited a day, called again. The third time, he picked up, and what he told me made everything worse. The Brookside Inn wasn't just built, it was copied. The architecture was nearly identical to 6 other motels across the country, all constructed within the same 3-year period in the early 60s, all under the same shell company, one that no longer existed. Each one shared the same blueprints, same lobby layout, same number of rooms, and, crucially, the same room missing on the plans. A space behind the mirrors, undocumented, unaccounted for. Greeley called them apertures. He said he first saw it in Michigan, a mirror that didn't reflect properly. Then again in Nevada, a wall that sounded hollow when it shouldn't have. He started investigating, pulling permits, digging into who approved the builds, but everyone he questioned either disappeared or denied everything. He became obsessed. His wife left. He was institutionalized for 6 months. When he got out, he tried to burn one of the motels down. He failed. Before I hung up, he said something that still wakes me up at night. The mirrors don't show us. They show the rest of us. What's left over when the world closes its eyes. He told me to destroy every mirror I found. Then he begged me to forget. I couldn't. Not after what Jess had said. Not after what I'd seen. So we went back. Not to Brookside, God no. That place was sealed now. maybe buried under all the weight of its own reflection. No, we went to another, a place called Hollow Pines Lodge, deep in the Colorado woods. Same structure, same paint, same mirror above the dresser in room 7 that I broke the glass the moment I walked in. And behind it, sure enough, was the tunnel. This one wasn't concrete. It was bone. Not literal bone, not at first glance. But the walls were shaped like rib cages, the floor soft and spongy, the ceiling pulsing ever so slightly with a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. And in the distance, a red glow throbbed like something alive. We stepped inside. Jess didn't hesitate. She said she remembered this one. We walked for what felt like hours. The path turned, narrowed, widened again. There were no side passages here, no doors, no bodies, just endless, living tunnel. The mirrors were gone. In their place were openings. Windows into other lives. Point one showed a version of me, sitting alone in a hospital bed, staring at a blank wall. Another showed Jess, much older, whispering to a child whose face was permanently blurred. One showed a city burning. Another, a motel overgrown with vines. The parking lot full of empty cars with running engines. I asked her what this place was. She said, "This is what's underneath the mirrors, what they eat, what they grow." I asked her how she knew. She said she'd been here longer than I realized, that she never left, that the version of Jess I pulled out was only the part of her that wanted to come back. The rest stayed behind. The real her. I don't know if I screamed. I don't remember. But I remember running. I remember turning corners that shouldn't have existed. I remember seeing the tunnel melt into a hallway of flesh and mirrors and mouths. That I remember hearing my own voice behind me, whispering things I never said. And then I woke up in a field, naked, alone, covered in handprints. It's been weeks, maybe months. I haven't seen Jess since. I don't know if I ever brought her back. I don't know if the motel was real. I don't even know if I'm real anymore. Sometimes, when I pass a mirror, my reflection hesitates a second too long. Sometimes, when I smile, I see a flicker of something else behind my eyes. Sometimes I think I'm still in the tunnel. Sometimes I think I never left. But mostly, I think there are more of us out here than anyone knows. Broken reflections walking in borrowed skin, smiling, blinking, waiting, until someone looks too closely and sees what's really looking back. I didn't go searching for the first mirror. Found me. That sounds like paranoia or madness, but I know now there's a difference between being crazy and being aware. I had been moving through ghost towns by then, ghost motels mostly, places with too many mirrors and too few people. I stopped using names. I stopped speaking. I learned to sleep without closing my eyes all the way. When you've looked too long into the glass, even the dark has a reflection. The nights were longer. The dreams came faster. By the end, I couldn't tell where my memories stopped and the reflections began. I don't remember the drive that got me there. I don't remember turning off the highway, but I remember the name on the rusted sign, barely visible through the grime of decades. The Glassway Rest. No street address. No road. Just a sunken parking lot, swallowed by trees. A crumbling concrete building that looked like it had been half-eaten by time. Felt older than anything I'd seen. Older than any Brookside, older than Hollow Pines. Ancient in a way that had nothing to do with years. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, I was standing at the beginning. This was the source. The place where the first tunnel had opened. The first mirror had turned wrong. Inside was dust and silence. The lobby still had chairs lined up against the wall, but they were covered in sheets. There was no front desk, just a hallway, and a wall of broken vending machines with shattered glass panels hanging like torn skin. A clock hung above it all, ticking backward. I followed the hallway. No room numbers, no doors, just mirror after mirror after mirror. They weren't mounted, they were grown. I don't know how else to describe it. They bubbled up from the walls, embedded like tumors under the skin of the building. Some were perfectly clear, others were pitch black. In every one I saw me, and in none of them did I look the same. My face was longer in one. My eyes were hollow in another. In several, I was being watched by something just out of frame. Something close. Something breathing. I moved forward. The floor dipped into a spiral. The hallway curled downward into the earth, like I was being pulled around the edge of a massive whirlpool. The mirrors grew more erratic. Some blinked, some wept, some bled. The reflections were no longer mine, they were everyone's. I saw children I didn't know trapped in hospital beds. I saw lovers frozen in mid-scream. I saw people seeing me back. Their eyes followed me through the glass as I passed. Their mouths opened, but the sound was a warbled hiss, like gas leaking from a ruptured valve. One mirror showed Jess again. Not the Jess I'd found, the first one. She was younger, and she was alone, sitting in a motel room I didn't recognize, carving symbols into the wall with a broken piece of glass. When she looked up, her eyes were white, not rolled back, white, like the pigment had been stripped out of her soul. I kept moving. I didn't stop. I didn't have a choice. The hallway ended in a door made of mirror shards, not hung, grown. The edges pulsed slightly. The handle was a bone. I touched it and the door opened by melting. It wept into the floor and revealed a space that made no architectural sense. A sphere, a massive mirrored sphere, floating in blackness. I wasn't standing on anything. I wasn't falling either, just suspended, my body meaningless, my mind hyper-aware. And at the center of the sphere, suspended by chains of light, was the first mirror. It wasn't made of glass. It wasn't made of anything. It was absence, a circular void in the center of the universe. Every reflection, every version, every life and death and scream and laugh, all of it spilled from this absence. Every tunnel connected to this. Every motel was a throat, every mirror a mouth. The first mirror wasn't a thing. It was a consciousness, a will. And now it had seen me. I didn't move, couldn't. Every mirror in the sphere turned to face me, not physically, but the reflections shifted, aligned, became me, thousands of them, each one different, each one wrong in some deeply personal way. My failures, my cruelty, my cowardice, my death, all versions I had buried or forgotten or refused to become. And now they stared back. One of them spoke. "You are not the first to come looking." Another stepped forward from its mirror, reaching. "You were always meant to return." A third, my reflection from the motel where Jess vanished, smiled wide and said, "Now you will see how deep the mirror goes." And then the first mirror opened. Not like a door, like an eye, a circular iris of nothingness peeled apart, and behind it was more nothing. A void with structure, a silence that screamed. And in its depth I saw the truth. The mirrors are not portals. They are memories of places that never existed, lives never lived, pain never experienced. And every time we look into one, we choose to step closer to the version of ourselves that we fear most, that we hate, that we're destined to become. The first mirror didn't reach for me. It reflected me, and in that reflection, I saw what I really was: not a person, a shadow, a ripple. I was the thing that crawled through the tunnels. I was the noise in the wall. I was the hand behind the glass. And then I woke up, back in a motel, alone. Room number unreadable, mirror shattered, no sign of Jess, just a note on the wall, carved with something sharp. Not all reflections are escape. Since then, I've been drifting, writing this, sharing what I can. Some nights, people find me, people like me, broken things who've slipped through the wrong pane of glass and haven't found their way back. We never talk about the first mirror, but we all feel it, waiting, watching, turning slowly in the dark like the eye of a dead god. And we know one thing with certainty now: it's still looking for you, because every time you check your reflection, it checks back. I used to think there was an end to it, that if I could reach the origin, if I could just get deep enough, find the first mirror, name it, see it, scream into it loud enough, I could somehow break the loop, stop the reflections, end the crawling thing that lived in the glass. But I was wrong. There's no center to this, no core, just descent, just layers. And every layer is sharper than the last. After I left the sphere, the mirrored eye, the void that saw me for what I really was, I wandered. Not in the real world anymore. Not in tunnels either. I was somewhere in between. Not dreaming, not awake, not dead, not living. There are no real words for that place, but it looked like a hotel. A corridor that folded in on itself like an origami nightmare. A looping hallway, carpeted in burgundy and reeking of formaldehyde. The lights overhead were chandeliers made of fractured reflections, each shard showing a different room, a different Jess, a different version of me curled into a different shape of suffering. I passed rooms with my name etched into the doors. Not Mr. Rillet or Guest. No, full names, middle names, old nicknames from childhood, slurs I hadn't heard since high school, titles I hadn't earned. Each room was a version of my life that had almost happened, each one humming softly, as if something inside was breathing against the walls. Room 309 showed a version of me who never left home. I was sitting in a recliner, bloated, lifeless, mouth open, eyes glued to a TV playing static. Room 222 showed me locked in a padded cell, screaming at a mirror that showed nothing at all. Room 114 showed Jess with someone else. She looked happy, healthier. I stared at that one too long, long enough for the door to ripple, and something pressed against it from the other side. A whisper from deep within. This one is not yours. I moved on. Eventually I came to a stairwell, just a concrete opening in the wall, steep and narrow and descending into pitch black. No banister, no exit sign, just a phrase carved into the wall at eye level, smeared in something brown and flaking. This is where the reflections end. I took the first step, then the second, then I fell. The fall wasn't physical, not in the way gravity usually works. It was like my concept of falling had been set loose. I dropped through time, through sound, through every mirror I'd ever looked into, through every pair of eyes that had ever looked back. I fell past the night Jess and I found the tunnel. I fell past the motel's birth, past the first mirror, past the thing that made it. And then I landed, not with a thud, with a feeling, a knowing. I was back, not in the tunnel, not in any motel, in a house, my house, childhood home, living room, TV on, static humming. Outside, the sky was pink and green like a bruise. The windows were covered in thick, breathing condensation. I turned slowly, and there he was, sitting on the couch. Me. But not me, older, sicker, skin like wax, eyes like pits, and smiling, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. He raised a hand and pointed at the TV. On the screen was me. Again, screaming in a motel hallway, covered in mirror shards, dragging Jess behind me. Then it changed. Me again, sleeping in the bathtub. Me digging at my own skin in a mirrorless room. Me sitting on a hotel bed carving the words, "Do not reflect," into my own chest. The figure beside me said, in my voice but deeper, older, emptier, "We are the echoes that outlived the sound." He turned and looked me in the eyes. "You wanted an end, so look." The house peeled away, the walls folded back, and I saw the truth. The mirrors weren't doors. They weren't memories. They weren't alive. They were records. Every mirror was a backup of someone's consciousness. A copy, a last gasp of a version that didn't survive, stored in glass like a fly trapped in amber. And I had broken mine. I had stared too long, dug too deep. Now I was one of them. An echo, a ripple. The reason my reflection lagged wasn't because it was haunted. It was because it wasn't me anymore. It was the real me. And I was what got left behind. Jess, she never escaped. Not fully. She was shattered like I was, spread across too many surfaces, too many tunnels. The one I saved? Just a piece. A ghost of her desire to live. That's why she didn't remember. That's why she whispered at night. The reflections weren't chasing me. They were calling me back. Because when something escapes a mirror, it leaves behind an opening, a hunger. And hunger calls. Now I sit in a motel room that doesn't exist. No number on the door. No exits. No ceiling fan. Just a mirror across from the bed. I haven't looked into it yet. Not directly, but I see motion in it. Slow, patient, waiting. When I sleep, I see the versions of me that made different choices. One turned around before the tunnel. One pulled Jess away. One stayed in the car. They're all dead now. Because the mirror doesn't care what you choose. Only that you see it. That you let it see you back. So if you're hearing this, if you're watching or reading or dreaming or remembering, understand this. The tunnel behind the mirror isn't a place. It's a function, a method, a call. One you've already answered. Because even now, as you read these words, you're not seeing your reflection in the screen. You're seeing mine. And if your hand moves a second too slow next time you reach for the bathroom light, if your smile lingers a moment longer than you meant it to, if your shadow forgets to follow you around the corner, you'll know it's starting. You've been marked, and the tunnel is already behind your glass. After everything, I knew I had to learn more about the mirrors, the tunnels, the endless reflections. If there was any hope of escape, it lay hidden in the fragments left behind by others who'd been swallowed whole. Survivors, those who'd escaped enough to warn the next. What I found was less a story and more a warning encoded in obsession. Scribbled notes in margins of forgotten books, symbols carved into motel walls, whispered confessions passed between frightened travelers. The mirrors, it turns out, were not just passive traps but active rituals, gates bound by specific actions, by patterns of light and sound, by gestures made in the wrong place at the wrong time. Some said the mirrors listen when you speak to them. Others claimed a particular rhythm of knocking on glass could open or close the tunnel. One note detailed the 7 steps of reflection, a sequence of actions survivors performed to avoid being pulled fully through: covering mirrors with cloth, avoiding eye contact, walking backwards while humming a lullaby, and never breaking the glass. The last was critical. Breaking a mirror wasn't escape, but a signal, a beacon, calling the thing behind the glass even closer. I tried each of these, covered every mirror I could find, whispered lullabies into the empty air, knocked lightly, hesitantly, hoping to calm the unseen watcher. But the thing in the glass does not tire. It does not listen. It waits. Then there was the hardest part, the silence. Survivors spoke of it as a state of mind, a mental space where you deny the reflection's existence entirely. A blindness. The paradox was clear. You must see without looking, exist without being seen, acknowledge the mirror but never meet its gaze. It's a form of mental discipline, a meditation on absence. But in practice, it felt like dying a little more every day, because the mirror is patient. The tunnels are infinite. The reflections are endless. And every time you look, you risk becoming the echo you fear. I still haven't figured out if the rituals work, or if they're just desperate gambles by people who don't want to disappear without a fight. What I do know is that the longer I stay away, the stronger the pull. The mirrors at motels, the reflective surfaces in everyday life, they're all threads of the same web, drawing me back toward the glass, toward the place where reality bends and breaks. Point: one night, I dreamt the mirror whispered to me, its voice like shattering glass and whispered silk. You will join us. We wait. We remember. We reflect. And when I woke, I found a new note written in jagged script on the bathroom mirror of my motel room. The glass does not forgive. The tunnel does not end, that you cannot escape the reflection you become. There is no end. There is no safety. Only the slow, inexorable merging with the glass. I write this now because maybe someone out there will listen. Maybe someone will see the warning and not look too long. Because once the tunnel finds you, once the mirror knows your name, you're already part of its story. And it never lets you go. The last story I'm about to tell isn't mine. I didn't experience it firsthand, but I believe it happened. Maybe because it was shared with me by someone who disappeared soon after. Someone who, like me, was pulled into the tunnel behind the mirror and almost lost everything. The survivor's name was Elena. I met her briefly at a rest stop years ago, her eyes hollow but burning with a strange fire. She warned me about the mirrors in a low voice, then disappeared before I could ask more. But what she told me haunts me still. Elena was a woman who had stared into the wrong mirror for too long. An antique mirror in a rundown hotel in Maine. She didn't notice the tunnel at first, just the way her reflection lagged, a second behind her real movements, like it was a separate being. Then she started hearing whispers, soft, coaxing, always calling her name. She tried the rituals, covering the mirror, knocking, avoiding eye contact. None worked. The tunnel began to open wider every day. One night, the reflection reached out through the glass, slowly, impossibly, touching her wrist, then her face, pulling her closer. Elena fought back by speaking aloud the names of her loved ones, clinging to memories, to identity. She carried a necklace her mother gave her, a talisman against darkness. But the reflection wasn't deterred. It mimicked her voice, repeating her name, twisting her memories into shadows. The final night, Elena barricaded herself in the bathroom, away from every mirror. She didn't sleep. She whispered prayers. But the glass came anyway, this time breaking on its own. Shards flew like knives, and the reflection poured out, a black liquid that slid under the door. Elena screamed as it enveloped her, consuming her in silence. The next morning, hotel staff found her room empty except for the shattered mirror and the necklace lying on the floor, cracked in two. No sign of Elena, no explanation, only the mirror, whole and glistening on the wall. As if nothing had happened. I don't know what happened to her after that. Maybe she became one of the reflections, trapped behind the glass forever, whispering warnings to the next person who dares to look. Maybe she escaped and is still running. Or maybe she's lost to the tunnel, a ghost in the mirrors, waiting for someone to come and set her free, or replace her. This story is a warning, like all the others. The mirror isn't just a surface, it's a threshold. A living thing that feeds on fear, doubt, and memory. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't discriminate. It only waits for the moment you look away or look too closely. So if you ever find yourself alone in a hotel room, a motel, or a place that feels too quiet, if you see a mirror that feels wrong, don't touch it. Don't knock on it. And whatever you do, don't break it. Because once the mirror cracks, the tunnel opens wide, and there's no telling what or who will come through. If you're hearing this, know that you're not alone. The mirrors are everywhere, and the tunnel never ends. Be careful where you look, because you might just find yourself staring back. The journal I found was tucked inside the spine of a book in a forgotten shelf of an abandoned motel's library. A battered leather-bound notebook, yellowed with age and stained with what looked like water or something darker. The entries were frantic, raw, and desperate, written by a man named Caleb, a former guest who, like me and Jess, had stumbled into the nightmare of the mirrors and the tunnel. His handwriting was shaky, sometimes almost illegible, but the words carved out a chilling map of what it means to be caught between reflection and reality. He described the first days after seeing his reflection hesitate, the way it moved a fraction too slow, or sometimes smiled when he didn't. He tried the rituals, avoiding mirrors, covering surfaces, speaking lullabies he barely remembered. But none of it stopped the creeping presence. It started with whispers inside his head, echoes of thoughts not his own, memories he'd never lived, voices calling him from empty rooms. The mirror, he wrote, was not just watching, it was learning. It mimicked his fears, his regrets, weaving them into hallucinations so vivid he couldn't tell what was real anymore. Over time, Caleb's journal entries became erratic. Pages filled with strange symbols, drawings of twisted faces trapped behind glass, and repeated phrases like, "The glass knows," "Don't let it speak," and "I am not the echo." He described nights where the mirror would speak to him directly, not in words but feelings. Cold hunger, creeping dread, a slow pull at his soul. He confessed to waking up with scratches on his skin, bruises forming like handprints that no one else could see. One entry ended abruptly. "Tonight I face the mirror alone. If you find this, remember, do not look, do not speak, do not become." After that, the journal was blank. Reading Caleb's words, I understood that the mirror is more than a prison. It's a predator. It absorbs identity, fractures the mind, and slowly erodes the self until all that's left is a hollow reflection, a copy without a soul. And the worst part? The mirror doesn't just copy you, thinks. It adapts. It learns from your fears and your memories and uses them against you. It can imitate voices of loved ones, recreate forgotten moments, and twist them into traps. Caleb's final warning wasn't just about avoiding mirrors. It was about guarding your mind, holding on to what makes you you when everything else starts to slip away. Because once the mirror starts to think for itself, once it learns your deepest secrets and uses them to call you back, escape isn't just impossible, it's meaningless. I keep Caleb's journal with me now. It's a reminder of what I'm up against, a record of the slow unraveling, but also a map of sorts. If I can hold onto my identity long enough, maybe I can resist becoming just another echo. Maybe I can find a way back from the tunnel dot, or maybe the mirror is already winning. Because every time I catch my reflection hesitating just a second too long, I wonder, how much of me is still me, and how much is just waiting for me to blink? If you ever find a tunnel behind a mirror, remember Caleb's words. Do not look, do not speak, do not become, because the thing behind the glass is already reaching for you. And it knows your name. Living with the mirror watching you is like being trapped inside a nightmare you can't wake up from. A constant, suffocating presence that warps every moment, every memory, every breath. It's not just that the reflections lag or smile wrong, or that the glass sometimes seems to ripple like water. It's the way time itself bends and fractures. Days stretch and collapse without warning. Hours bleed into seconds, and seconds freeze into eternity. You'll catch yourself losing chunks of your life, gaps you can't explain. 1 minute you're standing in a motel bathroom, the next you're outside in the parking lot with no memory of how you got there. The mirror waits in those gaps, feeding on your confusion, twisting your perception until you question what's real and what's reflected. The worst part is the loneliness. The mirror isolates you, making you doubt your own senses and sanity. You try telling someone, anyone, about the tunnel, the reflections, the thing lurking behind the glass. But their eyes glaze over. They smile politely and change the subject. Because who believes a story about haunted mirrors and invisible tunnels? So you retreat inward, guarding every thought, every feeling, knowing that the mirror will use your weaknesses against you. It whispers your darkest secrets back to you, twisting them into threats. Sometimes you hear voices, not outside, but inside your head, echoes of the versions of yourself trapped in other mirrors, crying out for help or cursing you for abandoning them. They want to pull you in. You start avoiding all reflective surfaces, not just mirrors, but windows, phone screens, polished silverware. You cover everything with cloth, tape, paper. Yet the reflections find ways to seep through cracks and edges. You catch glimpses of eyes watching from darkened glass, flickers that disappear when you blink. You learn to live in half-light, your skin constantly prickling with the sensation of being seen, even when you're alone. Your dreams dissolve into the tunnel. You wake up somewhere new, somewhere impossible, with no idea how you got there. The walls breathe, the floors pulse, the ceiling ripples, and always, just out of reach, the mirrors multiply, each one showing a different version of yourself. Broken, whole, lost, waiting. Time loses meaning. Memory unravels. You wonder if you're the original or just another echo. And every time you see your reflection hesitate or smile without you, you know the mirror is winning. Because it doesn't just trap you, it becomes you. If you find yourself caught in the tunnel behind the mirror, remember this: don't trust your eyes, don't trust your memories. Most of all, don't trust your reflection, because somewhere, just beyond the glass, the other you is waiting, and it wants to take your place. This is the final message I'm able to send. After all that's happened, after the tunnels, the mirrors, the countless versions of myself trapped and broken, I've come to realize there may be no true escape. The mirror doesn't just reflect, it consumes. It fragments your soul into shards scattered across endless reflections, across infinite tunnels that fold and unfold like living nightmares. If you're hearing this or reading these words, know that you have already been seen. The moment you noticed something was wrong with your reflection, the tunnel began reaching for you. It's patient. It waits through the years, through moments of doubt and fear, feeding on every hesitation, every glance in a mirror. The mirror's hunger is endless, its reach inevitable. I've watched friends disappear behind glass, vanish into mirrors, leaving behind only silence and cracked frames. Sometimes the reflections come back, smiling, whispering, calling your name with voices that sound like you but aren't. They want to replace you, to wear your skin and live your life as a hollow echo. You can fight, you can try the rituals, the coverings, the lullabies, the mental silences, but it only delays the inevitable. The tunnel never closes, the mirrors never forget. I write this as a warning and a plea. Never trust the surface of things. Never trust a reflection that hesitates. Never look too long or you will be lost. The mirrors are doors, and behind them is nothing safe. Only waiting, only watching, only the slow, silent pull into the dark glass that swallows all who linger. If you can run from the reflections, cover every mirror you find. And if you hear a whisper calling your name, don't answer. Don't turn, because once you step through, there is no coming back. This is my final reflection, a flicker of what remains. I hope it reaches someone. I hope it warns someone before the mirror closes forever and the tunnel swallows us all. After sending that last message, the silence swallowed me. Days blurred together, a limbo where time folded like the cracked surfaces I feared. The mirror's pull grew stronger, an ache beneath my skin, a static whisper at the edges of hearing. I started to see things that weren't there. Reflections lingering after I moved, shadows cast by no light, faces pressed against glass panes from the other side, mouths mouthing my name without sound. My memories frayed. Places, people, moments twisting and folding into one another. I questioned everything. Was Jess still out there? Was she trapped in a tunnel or already gone beyond the glass? Was I? The mirror doesn't just trap you physically. It consumes your history, your essence, until all that's left is a hollow echo wearing your face. One night, as I sat alone in a room with no number, the mirror before me shimmered. The surface rippled like water, and from its depths emerged a version of me. Not quite mine, older, wearier, eyes glowing faintly with an unholy light. It smiled that terrible smile, the smile of something waiting patiently for the real me to blink first. It spoke, voice a distorted echo. You belong here now. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The room pulsed with cold light. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the reflection dissolved back into glass, leaving me alone once more. But I knew the mirror was no longer just watching. It was waiting, waiting for me to become the reflection it had already claimed. Every mirror in every hotel, every window on every street, threads connecting me to a vast web of trapped souls, reflections stitched into the fabric of the glass. I am both prisoner and echo, hunter and hunted, and the tunnel behind the mirror is still open, still waiting for the next to look too long, to hesitate, to falter, to become part of the endless reflections that wander between worlds, lost forever. After all I've seen, all I've lost, all the reflections that haunt my every waking moment, I realize now there is no true escape. The tunnel behind the mirror isn't a place. It's a state of being. It's the silent fracture between who you are and who you might have been, a space where time and identity dissolve into endless echoes. The mirrors don't just reflect us. They fragment us, splinter us into countless versions, each trapped behind glass, waiting, watching, always reaching for the next to look too long. I still carry the weight of those who vanished before me and those who came after, including Jess, whose face flickers sometimes in the corner of my vision, sometimes in the mirror, sometimes just beyond it. I can't say if she's truly gone or just another reflection, lost in the endless maze of glass. If you ever find yourself staring too long at a mirror, if your reflection hesitates, smiles without you, or moves just a fraction too late, turn away. Don't knock. Don't speak. Don't break the glass. Because once the tunnel opens, once the mirror claims you, there's no turning back. You become one of the echoes, one of the shadows walking behind the glass, waiting for someone else to see past the surface and step inside. This is not just a story. It's a warning, a plea. If you hear my voice, if these words reach you, listen carefully. The mirrors are watching. The tunnels are waiting. And somewhere, just beyond the reflection, the next chapter begins. Be careful where you look, because the mirror is always watching back. Story 3. I never thought I'd take a babysitting job that would haunt me for years, but that's exactly what happened. It started out as a simple gig. A wealthy couple needed someone to watch their newborn daughter, while they worked late into the night. The house was an old Victorian on the edge of town, the kind of place that creaks with every step and smells faintly of damp wood. When I arrived, the parents were polite but oddly reserved, almost like they were hiding something beneath their forced smiles. They showed me to the nursery, a small, pastel-colored room with soft toys and a crib in the corner. Then, before leaving, the father did something that immediately set my nerves on edge. He placed a plain, unmarked bowl on the floor right next to the crib. It was filled with raw, bloody meat, fresh, glistening, and unmistakably raw. "This is for the baby," he said without looking me in the eye. "Leave it there every night. Don't touch it. She needs it." I blinked, unsure if I heard him right, and asked what it was for. He shrugged like it was the most normal thing in the world and rushed me through the explanation. The mother said nothing, just nodded silently. I wanted to refuse, but I needed the money, so I agreed, even though my stomach churned at the sight. That first night, I sat nervously in the rocking chair, the bowl of raw meat sitting ominously on the nursery floor. The scent, metallic, sour, and unsettling, crept into every corner, making it hard to breathe. The baby was quiet, but I kept glancing at that bowl, feeling like it was watching me back. Hours later, the parents returned, silently taking the bowl away without a word. It was the start of something I would never be able to explain. A strange, suffocating secret that lived in that house, in that nursery, every night. After that first night, I couldn't stop thinking about the bowl of raw meat. The way the father insisted I leave it there, the way the mother quietly agreed without explaining anything. It all felt wrong. But every time I tried to bring it up, they shut down the conversation with cold looks or vague reassurances. The next evening, I showed up at the house just before dark. The sky was heavy with clouds, casting long shadows through the tall trees surrounding the property. The front door creaked open before I could knock, and the mother greeted me with a faint, forced smile. "We'll be late tonight," she said quietly, leading me upstairs to the nursery. The baby was lying in her crib, her eyes just fluttering shut. The father appeared behind her, carrying the bowl again. This time, the meat inside looked different. It wasn't just raw beef anymore. It had a darker color, almost black at the edges, like it had been sitting too long or had begun to decay. A sour, coppery smell filled the room as he placed it gently on the floor next to the crib, avoiding my gaze. "Don't touch it," he said again, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. "Is it safe?" I asked. The mother's eyes flashed with something I couldn't place. "Fear? Anger? It has to be," she said quickly. "It helps her sleep." That night, as the parents slipped out quietly, I settled into the rocking chair, trying to ignore the nauseating smell seeping from the bowl. The baby slept, but something about the air in that room was different. Heavy, charged, like the walls themselves were watching me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine when I noticed the shadows. They weren't just cast by the furniture. They moved in ways no light should allow, flickering at the edges of my vision. They seemed to pulse and stretch, dark shapes twisting like smoke or smoke twisted into shapes, almost human. I kept telling myself it was my imagination. The baby stirred suddenly, letting out a tiny whimper, and my heart jumped. I reached toward her, but my eyes were drawn back to the bowl. The meat inside seemed to writhe, subtly shifting as if something beneath the surface was alive. I leaned in closer, trying to see better, and the smell grew overwhelming. My stomach churned, and I took a step back, gripping the armrest of the chair. The baby began to cry, low and urgent, and the shadows around the crib seemed to grow longer, darker, closing in like smoke thickening into a fog. I picked the baby up, whispering soothing words, but she only calmed when I gently turned her so she could look at the bowl. It was like she was mesmerized, her tiny eyes locked onto that gruesome mass of meat. I stayed awake the whole night, rocking her back and forth, watching the strange shadows dance. When the parents returned, I told them about the movements, the smell, the shadows. The father's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "You have to understand," he said quietly. "This isn't just about the baby. That bowl is a protection. Protection from what? I asked, voice trembling. The mother finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. There's something here, something old, something that's always been in this house. I wanted to laugh it off, say it was nonsense, but the terror in their eyes told me otherwise. Over the next few days, I tried to learn more, sneaking into the library at the local museum and digging through old newspapers and town records. What I found made my blood run cold. Stories of children disappearing in that very neighborhood, strange figures glimpsed in the woods, and a family that once lived in this house who vanished without a trace. They were rumored to have dabbled in dark rituals, sacrifices, feeding the things. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I read, the more I understood why the parents insisted on the bowl. They were feeding something, something that demanded raw flesh to leave their baby alone. And I was stuck in the middle, watching the line between normal and nightmare blur with every passing night. That night, I was alone in the house with the baby again, the bowl of raw meat resting on the nursery floor like some grotesque altar. The air was thick with that metallic stench, stronger than before, almost suffocating. I sat in the rocking chair, clutching the baby monitor with sweaty palms, trying to keep my nerves steady. The baby had fallen asleep, but her eyelids fluttered now and then like she was dreaming something violent. I kept glancing toward the bowl, the shadows pooling around it as if something was stirring beneath the surface. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed softly from the corner of the room. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the baby, it was coming from the direction of the bowl. I froze, every muscle locked in fear. The raw meat started to shift subtly, as if something writhing beneath it was pushing against the flesh. I blinked hard, thinking it must be my mind playing tricks, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. The shadows on the walls around the crib began to twist and stretch, taking on shapes that resembled faces, distorted, anguished, and malicious. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone. The baby's eyes snapped open wide, staring past me at the bowl. Her tiny hands reached out, trembling, as if she was trying to touch something invisible. The growling morphed into whispered voices, unintelligible but filled with rage and sorrow. Then, without warning, the nursery door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. The temperature dropped so fast my breath became visible in the air. I tried the door, locked. Panicked, I set the baby down gently in the crib and ran to the window, pounding on the glass, hoping someone outside would hear me. The baby began to cry, but her cries were mixed with strange gurgling sounds, like she was struggling against something unseen. I spun back toward the crib and froze. The shadows had gathered into a swirling mass around the bowl, stretching upward like a living thing. The meat itself was pulsing now, as if it had a heartbeat. I swear I saw something move beneath the surface. Claws, teeth, something monstrous. Desperate, I grabbed a blanket to cover the bowl, hoping to block whatever dark energy it was radiating. The moment the cloth touched the meat, a shrill scream echoed through the house, vibrating in my ears. The shadows recoiled violently, then vanished like smoke in the wind. The door to the nursery creaked open slowly on its own, releasing the cold grip from the room. I scooped up the baby and fled to the living room, locking the nursery door behind me. For hours, I sat trembling, listening for any sign of what had just happened. When the parents returned at dawn, bleary-eyed and calm, I told them everything in a rushed whisper. The father's face went pale, and the mother's hands trembled. "You saw it?" the father said quietly, voice thick with something I couldn't place. Relief? Fear? "You saw what protects her." "Protects her from what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked away. "From the thing that comes for her if the bowl is not there." The mother took the baby from me, cradling her tightly. "It's not human," she said. "It's an ancient hunger that lingers here. The meat is a sacrifice, a ward." I wanted to run, to leave the house and never look back, but something held me there. Curiosity, fear, obligation, I don't know. That night marked the moment I realized the family's dark secret wasn't just some strange superstition. It was a nightmare come to life, and I was trapped in its grip. Over the following days, I became obsessed, digging deeper into the history of the house and its previous occupants. I discovered that years ago, a family vanished mysteriously. The same family rumored to have practiced dark rituals to keep a curse at bay. Some locals whispered about a creature that feeds on children, demanding blood and flesh as tribute. And now, that same hunger seemed to be prowling inside the nursery, bound and fed by the raw meat left night after night. The baby, innocent and unaware, was the center of this terrible bargain. And me, I was the unwilling guardian, watching over a darkness that waited patiently beneath the surface, hungry for more than just flesh. The next few nights blurred into a waking nightmare. Each evening, I arrived at the house with a growing sense of dread tightening in my chest. The raw meat bowl awaited me in the nursery, a sinister reminder of the ritual I had no choice but to follow. I noticed subtle changes in the baby too. Sometimes she'd stare at the bowl with a strange intensity, her tiny brows furrowed as if she was listening to voices I couldn't hear. Her sleep became restless, punctuated by soft whimpers and twitching limbs. One night, after the parents left, I stayed long after she'd fallen asleep. The room grew colder, the shadows thicker, pooling near the bowl like a living thing. I heard faint scratching sounds coming from the meat, delicate, slow, like nails clawing at the inside of the bowl. My breath hitched, but I forced myself to stay calm. That's when the whispers began. At first, they were so quiet I thought I was imagining them. Soft murmurs. Words I couldn't understand but that filled the air with a weight I couldn't ignore. The baby's eyes fluttered open, and she looked right at me, her gaze too knowing for a newborn. "It's hungry," I whispered to myself. "What is it hungry for?" Suddenly, the bowl began to move again, the meat pulsing and shifting as if something underneath was trying to break free. The shadows bent toward the bowl, and in the dim light, I could swear I saw eyes, black, wet, and staring back at me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. Then, the baby screamed, a piercing, unnatural sound that echoed through the entire house. I rushed to her crib and scooped her up, but she clung to the bowl's side as if it was a lifeline. "No," I said, shaking her gently. "It's not safe." My voice trembled, and tears welled up in my eyes. The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. For the first time, I understood the terrible bargain the family had made. The raw meat wasn't just food, it was a binding, a shield, and a prison all at once. Without it, whatever lived in the shadows would claim the baby. I wanted to run, to scream, to burn that bowl and never look back. But something rooted me to the spot. A deep, dark fear that if I moved, if I disobeyed, the creature would come for me next. The parents returned at dawn, their faces pale and drawn. They didn't ask how the night went. They already knew. The father's eyes met mine, filled with a haunting sorrow. "You saw it again," he said softly. "The hunger never sleeps." The mother held the baby close, whispering prayers I couldn't understand. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way to keep her safe." I wanted to believe them, but I also wanted to run far away. That night, as I left the house, I glanced back once more at the nursery window. Behind the curtains, I thought I saw something watching me. A shape dark and still, waiting patiently for the next night's offering. I could hardly sleep that night after leaving the house. The smell of raw meat seemed to cling to my clothes and skin, as if it had followed me out into the night. My mind was a tangle of fear and confusion, replaying everything I had seen and heard. What was this thing the family was feeding? Why did they act like it was the only thing standing between their baby and some unimaginable horror? The next evening, despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I found myself walking back to that old Victorian house. Part of me needed answers, or maybe I just didn't want to admit how deeply I'd been drawn into this nightmare. The porch creaked beneath my feet as I stepped inside, the cold air thick and heavy with an almost palpable tension. The parents greeted me quietly, their faces drawn and tired, shadows under their eyes betraying sleepless nights. They said nothing about the previous night's events, but I could tell they were watching me closely, like they were waiting to see if I would crack. Upstairs, The nursery was dimly lit by a single night light, casting long, flickering shadows that danced along the walls. The bowl of raw meat sat on the floor as always, but tonight it seemed even more grotesque. The flesh darker, slick with something that looked like blackened blood. I could almost hear it pulse, a faint thumping beneath the surface that matched my racing heartbeat. As I sat in the rocking chair, the baby lay peacefully in her crib, innocent and unaware of the darkness that surrounded her. But I wasn't at peace. The air felt charged, alive with something ancient and terrible. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Minutes felt like hours, and the shadows thickened until the room was almost swallowed in darkness. Then I heard it, the low growl from the corner near the bowl. It started softly, barely audible, but gradually it grew louder and more urgent. My eyes darted to the meat, and I could swear it was moving, pulsing like a living thing. The smell intensified, burning my nostrils and twisting my stomach into knots. The baby stirred, her tiny hands reaching out toward the bowl. That's when the shadows began to shift and writhe, twisting into grotesque shapes that pressed against the nursery walls like dark smoke. I saw faces emerge in the flickering gloom, faces twisted in agony and rage, eyes black voids that seemed to pierce through me. A terrible realization hit me. These were not just shadows. They were trapped souls, bound to the meat as part of some dark bargain made long ago. I tried to stand, to leave, but my limbs felt heavy, like I was sinking into the floor. The voices began, low whispers that filled the room with chilling promises and threats, echoing from the shadows. Feed us, free us, join us. I clutched the baby closer, rocking her gently as she whimpered softly. The growls crescendoed into a roar that shook the very walls. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut, cutting off all light except the feeble glow from the night light. The room plunged into darkness, and I was left alone with the hungry shadows and the bowl of cursed meat. Panic surged through me, but amid the chaos, I understood something terrifying. This creature, this ancient hunger, wasn't just feeding on flesh. It was feeding on fear, on pain, on the very life force of the child. The parents' ritual, horrible as it was the only thing holding it back. But every night it grew stronger. Every night the cost of that protection increased. And I was trapped in the middle, a guardian for a dark secret I could neither understand nor escape. When dawn finally broke, the shadows receded like smoke blown by the wind. The parents returned silently, collecting the bowl with hands trembling from exhaustion. Their eyes met mine with a mixture of gratitude and despair. "You saw what waits," the mother said softly, "and now you know why we must keep feeding it." I left the house that morning with a weight in my chest heavier than ever before. The memory of those black, hollow eyes and the sound of that unearthly growl haunted me. I didn't know how much longer I could keep watching over the baby, how long I could keep pretending this nightmare was just a job. But deep down, I feared that if I ever walked away, the darkness waiting in the nursery would finally be free to claim her, and maybe, then, come for me. The nights that followed felt like I was sinking deeper into some dark abyss I couldn't escape. Every time I crossed that threshold into the Victorian house, my stomach churned with a mixture of dread and helplessness. The raw meat bowl had become a grotesque symbol, a constant reminder of the unnatural thing lurking just beyond the veil of normalcy. One evening, as I arrived, the sky was bruised purple with storm clouds, heavy and low. The wind whipped through the gnarled branches outside, scratching against the windows like desperate fingers trying to break in. The parents greeted me silently in the foyer, their faces pale and drawn. The mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and the father's jaw was clenched tight, as if he was holding back some terrible weight. Without a word, they led me upstairs to the nursery. The baby lay in her crib, peacefully asleep for once, but the bowl of raw meat on the floor seemed to throb in the dim light, its surface slick and uneven, as if it breathed on its own. The smell was worse than ever, sharp, metallic, like a wound that refused to heal. I wanted to turn and run, but I knew I couldn't. I had become the unwilling guardian of this terrible secret. As I sat down in the rocking chair, the baby monitor crackled faintly with static, the silence in the room thick enough to suffocate. Minutes passed like hours, each second stretching out into a long, suffocating eternity. Then I noticed the shadows, darker and deeper than before, twisting along the edges of the walls, crawling closer to the bowl. A faint whispering began, almost inaudible, a chorus of voices speaking in tongues I couldn't understand. My heart hammered in my chest as the whispers grew louder, morphing into anguished wails and guttural growls. The baby stirred, her eyes snapping open wide. She looked at the bowl with an intensity that chilled me to the bone, like she recognized something in that foul mass. Her little hands reached out, trembling, as if beckoning the shadows themselves. Then the shadows pulsed and writhed, pooling and swirling like a living creature hungry to be fed. Suddenly, the bowl's surface broke, and I saw it. A dark shape slithered beneath the raw meat, something slick and cold with eyes like burning coal. It was grotesque and inhuman, a nightmare made flesh that pulsed with ancient hunger. The shadows extended tendrils toward it, feeding into a darkness so vast I could feel it pressing against my mind, trying to pull me in. Panic seized me, but my limbs were frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The baby screamed, a sound that shattered the silence, tearing through the house like a banshee's wail. The door slammed shut behind me, and the temperature dropped until my breath hung in the air like mist. I tried to open the door to escape, but it wouldn't budge. The room closed in, the shadows thickening, pressing against me with a cold, clammy grip. The whispers became words I could barely comprehend. Feed us, join us, forever. I held the baby tightly, rocking her in desperate silence. The creature beneath the meat pulsed again, its eyes burning brighter, its hunger insatiable. I realized then the horrifying truth. The family's ritual was not just protection. It was a pact, a deal forged in blood and fear, feeding a darkness that grew stronger each night. And I was trapped in the middle of it, a witness to a nightmare that no one else could see or understand. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning in that suffocating room. Finally, as the first light of dawn pierced through the curtains, the shadows recoiled, retreating like smoke blown away by the wind. The door creaked open, and I fled into the hallway, my heart pounding as I grasped for breath. When the parents returned, their faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow, I told them everything. The father nodded grimly. "It's hungry," he said simply, "and the more it feeds, the more it demands." The mother whispered a prayer, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way to keep her safe." I left the house that morning, my mind racing, my body trembling. I didn't know how long I could keep watching over a darkness so ancient, so hungry. But deep down, I feared that if I ever stopped, if I ever walked away, the creature waiting beneath the meat would finally be free to claim the baby, and perhaps then come for me. The days that followed felt like a waking nightmare I couldn't escape. Each time I approached that house, the sense of dread grew heavier, like a storm pressing down on my chest. I tried to avoid thinking about the bowl of raw meat, but it haunted my every moment, its presence lingering in my mind like a shadow I couldn't outrun. The parents became quieter, more withdrawn, their eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear, as if they were carrying a secret too terrible to speak aloud. One evening, as I arrived for my shift, the mother met me at the door with a trembling hand and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're so sorry," she whispered, leading me upstairs without explanation. In the nursery, the baby lay asleep, the bowl of meat waiting patiently on the floor, darker, slicker, and emitting a putrid smell that seemed to seep into my very bones. As the parents left, locking the door behind them, I sat in the rocking chair, clutching the baby monitor like a lifeline. The air was thick and heavy, charged with an unseen presence that made my skin crawl. Shadows gathered in the corners, pulsing and shifting with unnatural life. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed from the corner where the bowl sat. My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned my gaze toward the grotesque offering. The meat writhed slightly, as if something beneath it struggled to break free. The baby's eyes fluttered open, her gaze locking onto the bowl with a disturbing intensity. She reached out, fingers trembling, as the shadows bent toward her, stretching like dark tendrils hungry for release. The growl grew louder, a sound filled with rage and desperation. The nursery door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang, plunging the room into darkness save for the pale glow of the night light. The temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath in the air. Panic gripped me, but I forced myself to stay calm, rocking the baby gently as the whispers began. Voices speaking in ancient tongues, filled with sorrow and menace. The shadows pressed closer, and in the flickering light, I saw them. Faces contorted in agony, eyes hollow and accusing. They reached for the bowl, for the creature trapped beneath the meat's surface. I understood then, this thing was bound by the ritual, fed by the sacrifice of raw flesh, held prisoner by a curse older than the house itself. The baby screamed, a piercing wail that shattered the silence and sent shivers down my spine. The shadows recoiled, and the door creaked open slowly, releasing its grip. Exhausted and trembling, I carried the baby out and locked the door behind me. When the parents returned at dawn, their faces were etched with grief and resignation. "You saw it," the father said quietly. "The hunger never sleeps." The mother pressed a hand to her lips, whispering a prayer I didn't understand. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way to keep her safe." I wanted to run, to escape this nightmare and never look back. But I knew that as long as I stayed, I was bound to the house, to the baby, and to the darkness that waited patiently beneath the bowl of raw meat. That night, I could feel the house watching me. The old Victorian seemed to breathe with a life of its own, creaking, sighing, whispering secrets in the dead air. As I climbed the stairs to the nursery, every step echoed like a warning. The baby was asleep in her crib, her chest rising and falling gently, a fragile island of innocence in a sea of darkness. The bowl of raw meat sat on the floor, glistening ominously under the soft glow of the night light. Its scent filled the room, coppery, sour, and sickeningly sweet, invading my senses and settling deep in my stomach like a rotting wound. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that this was some sick ritual I'd been asked to follow without question. But the truth clawed at me like a living thing. Something was wrong here. I settled into the rocking chair, holding the baby close, my eyes flickering between her peaceful face and the unsettling bowl at her feet. Time stretched and warped. The shadows deepened, pooling in the corners, stretching out like fingers reaching for something or someone. Then the whispers started. At first, barely audible, like wind rustling through dead leaves, but they grew louder, swirling around the room like smoke. The baby stirred, her eyes snapping open to stare at the bowl with a gaze far too knowing for a child so young. Her tiny hands twitched, reaching out as if to touch the pulsing mass of meat. And beneath it, I saw movement. A slick, black shape writhed beneath the raw flesh, eyes glowing faintly like dying embers in the dark. A low growl echoed from the corner, a sound too deep and unnatural to be anything human. Panic rooted me in place, but my heart hammered in my chest, and I couldn't look away. The shadows began to coalesce, twisting into shapes that resembled faces, twisted, anguished, and filled with silent screams. The whispers became guttural words, laced with anger and despair. Suddenly, the nursery door slammed shut, plunging the room into darkness save for the feeble light of the night light. The temperature plummeted, breath hanging in the air like mist. I reached for the baby, but my hands trembled uncontrollably. The creature beneath the meat pulsed again, hungry and restless, its eyes locking onto mine with a predatory gleam. The whispers turned into a chorus of demands. "Feed us, free us, join us." Tears blurred my vision as I rocked the baby, whispering promises of safety I wasn't sure I could keep. I realized then that the family's ritual was a fragile, desperate barrier, a pact forged in fear, blood, and ancient hunger. And if that barrier ever broke, the darkness waiting beneath the meat would finally be unleashed, claiming the baby and everything else in its path. Hours later, as dawn's first light spilled through the curtains, The shadows recoiled like smoke caught in the wind. The door creaked open, and I stumbled out, heart racing and breath ragged. When the parents returned, their faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow, I told them everything. The father nodded grimly. "It feeds on more than flesh," he said. "It feeds on fear, on life itself, and the price only grows." The mother clutched the baby tightly, whispering prayers I couldn't understand. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way." I left the house that morning, haunted by the memory of those glowing eyes and the terrible hunger beneath the meat. I didn't know how much longer I could watch over this darkness, but I feared that if I ever stopped, if I ever walked away, the creature would finally be free, and then there would be no escape. That night, the oppressive weight in the air was nearly unbearable. As I stood on the doorstep of the old Victorian house, the wind whispered through the trees like a warning. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with rain, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe and twist on the cracked stone walkway leading to the door. I hesitated, the knot in my stomach tightening into something colder and more primal than fear. Still, I pushed open the door, the hinges protesting with a long, drawn-out creak that echoed through the empty halls. Inside, the house was unnervingly silent, save for the faint ticking of an ancient clock somewhere deep within its bones. The parents met me without ceremony, their faces pale and drawn, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and secrets. They offered no comfort or explanation, only the same resigned silence that had become their language over the last few nights. Upstairs, the nursery awaited. The place that should have been a sanctuary of innocence now felt like a cage suffused with dark energy. The baby lay asleep in her crib, delicate and fragile, yet somehow already marked by the terrible ritual that bound her to this house and its horrors. The bowl of raw meat rested on the floor, more grotesque than ever, the flesh mottled with strange veins that pulsed faintly, like a living heart beating in time with the room's unnatural rhythm. The metallic stench hit me the moment I entered, filling my lungs with a sickly, coppery tang that seemed to seep into my very bones. I sat down in the rocking chair, my hands trembling as I held the baby close. Time stretched, the moments thickening into something almost liquid, as the shadows lengthened and deepened around the edges of the room. Then the whispers began, barely audible at first. A susurrus of voices speaking in an ancient tongue, weaving through the air like tendrils of smoke. The baby stirred, her eyes snapping open to fix on the bowl with an unsettling intensity. Her tiny hands twitched, reaching out as if drawn by some invisible force. Beneath the meat, a slick, black shape writhed and pulsed, its surface glistening with a cold, wet sheen. A low growl rumbled in the shadows, a sound too deep and alien to be anything human. The shadows twisted, coalescing into grotesque faces, distorted, anguished, and filled with silent screams that echoed in my mind. The whispers swelled into guttural words, laden with anger and despair. Suddenly, the nursery door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating like a thunderclap in the small room. The temperature plummeted, and my breath became visible in the frigid air. I tried to move, to escape, but my limbs felt leaden, as if the shadows themselves held me in place. The creature beneath the meat pulsed again, its eyes blazing with an insatiable hunger that pierced into my soul. The voices formed a chilling chorus. "Feed us, free us, join us." Tears blurred my vision as I rocked the baby, whispering promises of safety I doubted I could keep. The family's ritual was a fragile barrier, a desperate pact forged in blood, fear, and ancient hunger. I realized that if that barrier ever failed, the darkness beneath the meat would be unleashed, consuming the baby and everything else in its path. Hours passed, or maybe seconds. Time lost all meaning in the suffocating room. At last, as the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, the shadows recoiled, dissolving like smoke caught in a breeze. The door creaked open, and I stumbled out, gasping for breath and shaking uncontrollably. When the parents returned, their faces etched with grief and resignation, I told them everything: the shadows, the creature, the hunger that never ceased. The father's eyes darkened with sorrow and understanding. It feeds on more than flesh, he said. It feeds on fear, on life itself. And the price only grows. The mother clutched the baby tightly, whispering prayers I couldn't comprehend. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way." I left the house that morning feeling broken, haunted by the memory of those glowing eyes and the terrible hunger waiting beneath the meat. I didn't know how much longer I could keep watching over this darkness, but deep down, I feared that if I ever walked away, the creature would finally be free, and then there would be no escape. That night, the house seemed to breathe beneath my feet. A slow, ominous inhalation and exhalation that echoed through the creaking floorboards and shadowed hallways. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down on me as I climbed the narrow staircase to the nursery, each step heavier than the last, as if the house itself sought to pull me back, to keep me trapped within its sinister grasp. The air was thick with the metallic stench of raw meat, sharp and clinging, mingling with something darker, an ancient, fetid odor like rotting earth and forgotten sins. When I entered the nursery, the pale glow from the nightlight cast grotesque, flickering shadows that writhed and twisted along the faded wallpaper, animating the room with silent menace. The baby lay in her crib, her small chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm that seemed almost too delicate to trust. The bowl of raw meat sat on the floor nearby, more revolting than ever. Its flesh darkened, veined with black threads that pulsed faintly, like a grotesque heartbeat. The room felt suffocating, thick with a presence that pressed in on all sides. I settled into the rocking chair, clutching the baby close, but my hands trembled so violently I could barely hold her. Time stretched and twisted, moments folding into one another in a dizzying, endless loop. Then the shadows began to shift, thickening at the edges of the room, coalescing into shapes that defied reason. Human forms distorted in agony, their faces twisted with silent screams, eyes hollow and accusing. A low, guttural growl echoed from the corner where the bowl sat, vibrating through my bones and making the air itself seem to pulse with dread. I glanced at the meat, and horror washed over me. Beneath the surface, a slick, black shape writhed and twisted, eyes glowing like dying embers, reflecting a hunger that seemed to burn with unnatural fire. The baby's eyes fluttered open, her gaze locking onto the bowl with a terrifying intensity that belied her age. Her tiny fingers reached out, trembling as though beckoning whatever dark force lurked beneath the flesh. The shadows stretched toward the bowl, tendrils of darkness reaching out like grasping hands, pulsing with a sinister rhythm. The room grew colder, breath hanging like mist, and the nursery door slammed shut with a violent crash, plunging us into near-total darkness except for the pale, flickering light. My heart pounded wildly as whispers rose around me. Voices ancient and unknowable, speaking in tongues that twisted my mind and filled the space with an oppressive malevolence. The creature beneath the meat pulsed again, its eyes burning brighter, its hunger insatiable and infinite. The whispers formed chilling words. "Feed us, free us, join us." I rocked the baby gently, tears blurring my vision, whispering desperate promises I feared were hollow. The ritual was a fragile bond, a pact forged in blood and terror, holding back a darkness that threatened to consume us all. I was the unwilling sentinel, trapped in a nightmare where the line between protection and sacrifice blurred until it vanished altogether. Hours passed, or perhaps mere minutes, as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, washing away the shadows like smoke scattered by the wind. The door creaked open slowly, and I stumbled out of the nursery, shaking and gasping for breath. When the parents returned, exhaustion and sorrow weighed heavily on their faces. I told them everything: the shadows, the creature beneath the meat, the unending hunger that clawed at the edges of our reality. The father nodded grimly, eyes dark with a knowledge that chilled me to the core. "It feeds on more than flesh," he said softly. "It feeds on fear, on life itself, and the price only grows." The mother held the baby tightly, whispering prayers I couldn't understand, her voice thick with grief. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way." I left the house that morning, burdened with the terrible knowledge that the darkness beneath the meat was patient, eternal, and ravenous, and that as long as I stayed, I would be bound to this unholy vigil. I didn't know how much longer I could endure it, but I feared that if I ever turned away, the creature would finally break free, and then there would be no escape for any of us. That night, as I approached the old Victorian house, the sky above churned with heavy clouds, casting an ominous shadow that seemed to stretch and twist like dark fingers reaching down toward the earth. The air was thick with the scent of rain and something far fouler beneath it, a coppery tang that clung to my skin and settled deep in my lungs. The house loomed before me, silent and still, but it felt alive, as if it were watching, waiting. My footsteps echoed on the cracked stone path, and I hesitated before grasping the cold iron handle of the door. It swung open with a creak that sent a shiver down my spine, revealing the dim interior where shadows clung to every corner like cobwebs spun from darkness itself. Inside, the house smelled of dust and decay, but beneath that was something darker, something ancient. The parents greeted me silently, their faces pale and hollow-eyed, their movements slow and deliberate, as if weighed down by invisible chains. I followed them upstairs in near silence, the floorboards creaking beneath our feet, and stepped into the nursery, a room that should have been a sanctuary of innocence, but instead felt like a tomb. The baby lay asleep in her crib, her delicate face peaceful in the dim light of the night light. But my gaze was drawn immediately to the bowl on the floor, a shallow basin filled with raw meat, grotesque and glistening, its surface mottled with strange dark veins that pulsed faintly, as if it held a heartbeat of its own. The metallic stench was overpowering, curling in my nostrils and sinking into my bones, making my stomach churn. The parents left the room quietly, closing the door with a soft click that echoed like a sentence passed in some dark court. I sank into the rocking chair, holding the baby close as my eyes darted nervously between her innocent face and the horrifying offering at her feet. Time seemed to slow, stretching out into an agonizing crawl as the shadows deepened and shifted, coalescing into thick tendrils that writhed along the walls. The room grew colder, the air heavy with a presence that pressed down on me from all sides, suffocating and relentless. Then the whispers began, low murmurs at first, barely audible, like the wind stirring dead leaves outside the window. But gradually they grew louder, swirling through the air like smoke, a chorus of voices speaking in a language that twisted my mind and chilled my blood. The baby stirred, her eyes snapping open, wide and unblinking as they locked onto the bowl with a terrifying intensity. Her tiny hands twitched, reaching out as though summoned by some unseen force. Beneath the meat, I saw it, a slick, black shape that writhed and pulsed, its surface glistening like wet stone. Its eyes burned faintly, coals smoldering in the dark, filled with an insatiable hunger that sent a wave of nausea crashing through me. The low growl echoed again, reverberating in the room like the rumble of distant thunder. Shadows twisted into monstrous faces, contorted in agony, screaming silently with hollow, accusing eyes that bore into my soul. The whispers turned into guttural demands, words laced with ancient rage and desperation. Suddenly, the nursery door slammed shut behind me, the sound booming like a gunshot in the small room. The temperature plunged sharply, and my breath hung in the air like ghostly mist. I tried to move, to flee, but my limbs were frozen as if held by invisible chains. The creature beneath the meat pulsed with growing intensity, its eyes blazing brighter with a hunger that seemed limitless. The voices became a haunting chorus. Feed us, free us, join us. Tears blurred my vision as I cradled the baby, whispering promises of safety I feared I could never keep. I realized then that the family's ritual was a desperate pact, a fragile barrier forged in blood and terror, holding back a darkness older than the house itself. But each night, the cost grew heavier, the hunger more ravenous. And I was caught in the middle, a helpless guardian trapped in a nightmare without end. Minutes or hours passed. Time lost all meaning in the suffocating gloom. At last, the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, and the shadows recoiled like smoke caught in a sudden breeze. The door creaked open slowly, releasing me from the nightmare's grip. When the parents returned, exhaustion and sorrow weighed down their faces like a shroud. I told them everything: the shadows, the creature beneath the meat, the insatiable hunger that clawed at the edges of our reality. The father's eyes darkened with a sorrowful knowledge. "It feeds on more than flesh," he said softly. "It feeds on fear, on life itself, and the price will only grow." The mother clutched the baby tightly, whispering prayers in a language I couldn't understand. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way." I left the house that morning broken, haunted by the glowing eyes of that ancient hunger lurking beneath the raw meat. I didn't know how much longer I could continue this unholy vigil, but I feared that if I ever turned away, the darkness would finally break free, and then there would be no escape for any of us. That night, as I stood once again before the looming Victorian house, the weight of dread pressed heavily against my chest. The air was thick and heavy with the scent of rain and decay, mingling with that unmistakable metallic odor that had become all too familiar, the smell of raw flesh, stale and cloying. Every instinct screamed at me to turn away, to run far from this cursed place and the terrible secret it harbored, but something darker held me in place. An unspoken obligation, or perhaps a fear that if I fled, the horror waiting within would follow me, unstoppable and unbound. I pushed open the door, the hinges groaning a tired warning, and stepped into the dim interior where shadows pooled like ink in the corners of the hallway. The parents greeted me without words, their faces pale and drawn, eyes hollowed by exhaustion and something far worse, resignation. They led me upstairs silently, the air growing colder with each step until we reached the nursery. The room, bathed in the faint glow of a solitary night light, felt suffocating and charged with a sinister energy that made my skin crawl. The baby lay asleep in her crib, fragile and unaware of the dark ritual that held her life in balance. The bowl of raw meat rested on the floor, more grotesque than ever, the flesh mottled with strange veins pulsing faintly as if alive, emitting a sickly, coppery stench that filled the room and clawed its way into my senses. I sank into the rocking chair, heart hammering, clutching the baby close as the door closed behind me with a soft but final click. Time warped and stretched. Seconds bled into minutes, minutes into hours. The shadows deepened, twisting along the walls, crawling toward the bowl like a living tide of darkness. A low, guttural growl vibrated from beneath the meat, echoing through the room and resonating deep in my bones. My breath hitched as I caught movement beneath the raw flesh. A slick, black form writhing and twisting, eyes glowing faintly with a hunger that was ancient and endless. The baby's eyes snapped open, wide and unblinking, locking onto the bowl with an intensity that chilled me. Her tiny fingers twitched as if beckoned by some unseen force, and the shadows stretched toward her, tendrils of darkness curling like claws hungry to claim her. The air grew colder still, my breath visible as mist, and the whispers began. Low, indecipherable murmurs that swirled around the room like smoke, growing louder and more urgent. The shadows coalesced into grotesque, anguished faces, twisted in silent screams, eyes hollow and accusing, while the whispers turned into guttural words filled with ancient rage. Suddenly, the nursery door slammed shut with a violent crash, plunging the room into near-total darkness except for the pale flicker of the night light. The temperature dropped sharply, the cold biting into my skin like icy knives. Panic clawed at me, but I was frozen in place, limbs heavy and useless. The creature beneath the meat pulsed fiercely, its eyes burning brighter, hunger insatiable and terrifying. The voices formed a chilling chorus. "Feed us, free us, join us." I rocked the baby in trembling silence, tears streaming down my face as I whispered desperate promises I doubted I could keep. The family's ritual was a fragile barrier, a pact forged in blood and ancient terror, holding at bay a darkness that threatened to consume everything. Hours passed in an endless, suffocating nightmare where time lost meaning. Finally, as the first light of dawn filtered weakly through the curtains, the shadows recoiled, dissolving like smoke caught in a sudden breeze. The door creaked open slowly, releasing me from the nightmare's grip. When the parents returned, exhaustion and sorrow weighed heavily on their faces. I told them everything: the shadows, the creature beneath the meat, the relentless hunger clawing at the edges of our reality. The father's eyes darkened with profound sorrow. "It feeds on more than flesh," he said quietly. "It feeds on fear, on life itself, and the price will only grow." The mother clutched the baby tightly, whispering prayers I could not understand. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way." I left the house that morning broken and haunted by the glowing eyes of that ancient hunger lurking beneath the raw meat. I did not know how much longer I could keep this unholy vigil, but deep down I feared that if I ever turned away, the darkness would finally break free, and then there would be no escape for any of us. The following night, a suffocating heaviness settled over me long before I even stepped foot inside that cursed house. The sky was heavy with dark clouds that threatened rain, and a biting wind whispered secrets through the gnarled trees lining the driveway. My hands trembled as I gripped the cold iron doorknob, the metallic scent of raw meat already invading my senses before I even entered. As I crossed the threshold, the air felt thick and electric, buzzing with an unseen presence that clawed at my skin like icy fingers. The house was silent except for the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, each step an echo that seemed to stir the shadows deeper. The parents greeted me with hollow eyes and silent nods, their faces etched with exhaustion and dread. Without a word, they led me upstairs to the nursery, a room bathed in the sickly glow of a nightlight, its feeble light casting grotesque shapes that danced along the faded wallpaper. The baby lay in her crib, her breathing shallow but steady, a fragile beacon of innocence surrounded by the darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. The bowl of raw meat sat on the floor where it always did, but tonight it seemed more alive than ever. The flesh mottled with veins that pulsed faintly, as if the bowl contained a living heart beating in slow, terrible rhythm. The metallic stench was overpowering, curling in my nostrils and settling like poison deep in my lungs. I settled into the rocking chair, clutching the baby close as my eyes darted nervously between her peaceful face and the horrifying offering at her feet. The shadows around the room deepened and twisted, crawling up the walls like creeping smoke. A low, guttural growl echoed from the corner near the bowl, vibrating through my bones and making the air itself seem to pulse with dread. Beneath the meat, a slick, black shape writhed and pulsed, its surface glistening with a cold, wet sheen. Its eyes burned with a terrible hunger, burning coals glowing faintly in the dark. The baby's eyes snapped open, wide and unblinking as they locked onto the bowl with a terrifying intensity far beyond her years. Her tiny hands twitched, reaching out as if beckoned by some dark force. The shadows stretched toward her, tendrils of darkness curling like claws, hungry to claim her. The room grew colder still, my breath fogging in the frigid air, and the whispers began, low, indecipherable murmurs swirling like smoke, growing louder, filling the room with their sinister chorus. The shadows twisted into grotesque faces, contorted in agony, silent screams etched into their features, eyes hollow and accusing. The whispers became guttural words, laden with rage and despair. Suddenly, the nursery door slammed shut violently, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The temperature plunged, and the cold bit into my skin like frozen knives. I tried to move, but my limbs were paralyzed, held fast by an unseen force. The creature beneath the meat pulsed again, its eyes blazing with insatiable hunger. The voices formed a chilling chant. "Feed us, free us, join us." I rocked the baby in trembling silence, tears blurring my vision, whispering promises I feared were meaningless. I realized then the terrible truth. The family's ritual was a fragile barrier, a pact forged in blood and ancient fear, holding back a darkness that threatened to consume them all. Each night, the price of this protection grew heavier, the hunger more ravenous. And I was trapped, an unwilling sentinel in a nightmare that had no end. Time lost all meaning as I sat in that room of shadows and whispers. Minutes dragged into hours, or perhaps it was seconds, I could no longer tell. Then, as the first pale light of dawn crept through the curtains, the shadows recoiled like smoke scattered by a sudden breeze. The nursery door creaked open slowly, releasing me from the night's hellish grip. When the parents returned, their faces drawn with grief and exhaustion, I told them everything: the shadows, the creature beneath the meat, the unending hunger clawing at the edges of our world. The father's eyes darkened with sorrowful knowledge. "It feeds on more than flesh," he said softly. "It feeds on fear, on life itself, and the price only grows." The mother clutched the baby tightly, whispering prayers I could not understand, her voice thick with despair. "We're sorry you had to see this," she said, "but it's the only way." I left the house that morning broken, haunted by the glowing eyes of that ancient hunger lurking beneath the meat. I didn't know how much longer I could continue this unholy watch, but deep down, I feared that if I ever turned away, the darkness would finally break free, and then there would be no escape for any of us. In the weeks that followed, I found myself caught in a suffocating loop of fear and duty. Each night, I returned to that house, to the nursery where the bowl of raw meat waited like a sinister altar, pulsating with a darkness that defied reason. The baby's eyes, so innocent yet so haunting, watched me with an unsettling knowing, as if she carried the weight of the terrible secret within her small frame. The shadows never ceased their creeping. The whispers never stopped swirling around me like a storm of voices from another world. I became a prisoner of the ritual, bound by invisible chains stronger than steel, unable to walk away from a nightmare that had claimed not just the family, but my very soul. The parents remained distant and broken, their faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow, as if each day they carried the weight of a curse passed down through generations. One night, when the creature beneath the meat writhed with more ferocity than ever, I understood the truth in its deepest, most terrifying form. This was not just a feeding, but a waiting. The ancient evil was patient, biding its time until the moment it could break free from its bloody bonds and engulf everything in shadow. I realized then that the ritual was a desperate, fragile barrier, a line drawn in blood and fear to keep the darkness at bay, but one that could never hold forever. The price of this uneasy truce was rising, and soon it would demand more than just flesh. I am left now in the cold light of dawn, haunted and hollowed by what I have witnessed. The horror I babysit for is not just the creature beneath the meat, but the silence of those who keep it chained, knowing that the day the darkness breaks free will come, and when it does, there will be no place left to run, no light left to save us. I don't know how much longer I can endure this vigil, but I do know one thing with terrible certainty. The moment I walk away, even for a second, the darkness will rise. And when it does, it will consume everything, starting with the baby in that nursery and then, inevitably, me.